Доброе утро, уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа. Начинаем очередное заседание.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start the third day of our meeting, our discussions of the sixth Conference of State Parties. So now we're coming to the general discussion again. We still have 26 speakers on our list. So I'd like to ask each speaker, please, to try to keep to the 5-minute speaking time, and I will remind speakers about the speaking time if speakers do overrun. So please do try to keep to it strictly. The first speaker on our list is the representative of Brazil, the Director of Integrity, International Cooperation and Agreements, Office of the Controller General, Mr. Hamilton Cota Cruz.
Mr. President of the Conference, distinguished authorities and delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, bom dia. Mr. President, on behalf of the government and the people of Brazil, I extend my heartfelt condolences to the Russian people and to the families who have lost loved ones in the tragic accident last weekend. I would like to thank the Russian Federation and the UNODC for organizing the 6th session of the Conference of State Parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, I would first like to highlight recent improvements made to our frameworks against corruption. Reforms in anti-money laundering legislation and anti-corruption legislation, including the enactment of liability of legal persons for acts of corruption. The coordination of efforts among the various institutions with anti-corruption matters, a strong partnership with different public and private stakeholders, and the level of authority and autonomy and independence afforded to agencies like the Office of the Controller General, the Federal Prosecution Service, and the Federal Police to operate freely from undue influence. Those are improvements recognized by our review report of the UNCAC. These elements represent the strength of Brazilian institutions. The anti-corruption framework the country has built over the last decade enables us to successfully investigate corruption cases, include big and internationally spread ones like the one in the oil sector. It is no easy task, but it is a task we are very well equipped and committed to fulfill. Nevertheless, Brazil's anti-corruption framework continues to be improved. Early this year, the President of the Republic sent to the Congress a wide array of measures that included a bill to establish the civil forfeiture action, a bill to extend the requirement to all public officials of the 3 branches of government to present a clean record and no prior conviction of crimes before taking office, and a bill to criminalize the use of slush funds by political parties in campaign financing. Based on the new corporate liability law, the Office of the Controller General is now investigating 31 companies for acts of corruption committed against the public administration. Here, I would like to highlight the central role of state parties to provide assistance and international cooperation in investigations of and proceedings in civil and administrative matters relating to corruption, as provided for in Article 43, Paragraph 1 of the Convention. As he often said, corruption is a multifaceted offense. It should then come as no surprise that we must fight it using the widest possible range of tools and mechanisms. However, without international cooperation, it is very likely that the full implementation of countries' collective obligations to fight corruption and assist one another in doing so will be frustrated. That is why Brazil has tabled a draft resolution on enhancing the use of civil and administrative proceedings against corruption, including through international cooperation. As of today, and given the work being done by the Brazilian Minister of Justice, International Cooperation, we have over $173 million in assets that have been seized and frozen, but not yet returned to Brazil. We would be able to do much more if civil and administrative proceedings against corruption could also benefit from fast in regular international cooperation through multi-legal assistance channels. We expect that the adoption of our draft resolution will provide a useful platform for state parties to work together towards the full implementation of Article 43, Paragraph 1 of the Convention. Furthermore, the effective fight against corruption must include the cooperation among all stakeholders. It is imperative that we move from traditional forms of public participation to true social accountability, fostering then the direct participation of citizens in the formulation and evaluation of public policy and services. Brazil considers that civil society, the private sector, and other actors play an essential role in combating corruption. Brazil has, for example, included civil society in the various on-site visits it has received as part of the review mechanism for the conventions against corruption the country has signed. Brazil is a founder member of the Open Government Partnership and has drafted its 2 open government action plans with the full engagement of civil society organizations. Delegates. It is necessary for countries to offer further tools and information, especially in open format, so citizens can engage with our government to find innovative solutions to challenges we face in preventing, detecting, and punishing corruption. Brazil's Access to Information Law of 2001 has now given way to over 315,000 information requests at the federal level using a free online system. As the Convention's review mechanism prepares to begin the second cycle, we are very excited for the opportunity this new round of reviews will entail in terms of experience sharing and constructive debate about ways and avenues for implementing chapters 2 and 5. Brazil also believes that this would be a very strategic time to launch the second cycle of reviews, as UN member states have just approved the new Sustainable Development Goals. It is worth recalling that Goal 16.5 calls on states to substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms. This new cycle shall cover all of the provisions of preventive measures and asset recovery. It is worth recalling that many states are not parties to other international anti-corruption conventions. The UNCAC review mechanism is their only tool to assess their policies in the prevention and fight against corruption. A wide-ranging evaluation process is therefore more beneficial to those countries. Preventing, detecting, and punishing corruption are all tracks of the same pathway that should progress together and complement each other. So the fight against corruption, the good use of public resources can be truly effective. I wish us all the best in the work ahead in the next days. Thank you.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. I call upon the representative of Costa Rica, the prosecutor for public ethics from the General Prosecutor's Office, Mr. Vikas Solis, please.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to express gratitude for the hospitality and warm welcome that we have received from the people and government of the Russian Federation. We appreciate the work of Panama as outgoing president and the commitments that have allowed us to meet here today. First and foremost, I would like to express on behalf of Costa Rica the most heartfelt condolences to the people and government of the Russian Federation for the terrible loss of lives due to the air disaster which took place in recent days in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. My country aligns itself with the expressions of solidarity conveyed by the international community, in particular with the Russian families of the 224 victims of this tragedy. Mr. President, after almost 15 years of intense negotiations, campaigns, and international meetings, the international community has managed to construct a global institutional architecture in the area of anti-corruption, irrespective of the country where the corruption takes place. As such, Costa Rica welcomes that we are nearing our common objective of achieving universal adhesion to the Convention as a result of the large number of ratifications and accessions in a relatively short period of time. Mr. President, corruption is a complex social, political, and economic phenomenon which affects all countries of the world. As has been said by those who've spoken before me, it has concrete effects on the sustainable development of our countries. Against this backdrop, at the beginning of this year, during Costa Rica's pro tempore presidency of the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States, we boosted the establishment in Belém of this special declaration to counter corruption. This embodies the commitment of the region to fight against this scourge. In addition, after an arduous process of negotiations in which Costa Rica participated actively, we also welcome the inclusion of the issue of countering corruption in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was recently adopted in New York. In addition to the enormous economic costs to financing a state weakened by corruption and inefficiency, we all agree that when citizens lose faith in their institutions and turn against those in power, democracy is submerged. Democracy is lost and dies away. Corruption distorts social values so that society starts to view practices which are outside the law as legitimate. In addition, corruption is a kind of fuel because it contributes to the commission of other crimes, including those of a transnational nature. As such, the anti-corruption fight must be carried out without secrecy or lack of transparency, both nationally and internationally. In addition, we must be able to break the perverse coupling of corruption and impunity. As such, those who unduly use public resources must respond for their acts before the appropriate courts of justice. Essentially, what's at stake is creating a culture of ethics and probity at all levels. Our commitment in preventing and fighting corruption is enshrined in our legal order. That is the third pillar of our National Development Plan 2015-2018. For this reason, it has been decided to make the fight against corruption in Costa Rica a responsibility of the entire public service. Therefore, it must filter down into all governmental action at all levels. In particular, we believe it to be unjust that when we speak about corruption, we highlight solely public officials. For there to be a corrupt public official, there also must be an individual who corrupts them. As companies can be part of the problem, they can also be part of the solution. Our starting point is that there is a need to foster transparency in public institutions as a condition for public scrutiny of the work of government and for detecting acts of corruption. In this spirit, on the 3rd of April 2014, my country approved the Executive Decree number 38276 to bolster open government. This is a form of a relationship between citizens and their government, which is governed by fundamental principles such as transparency and accountability, as well as citizens' participation and the implementation of technology and communication platforms. These facilitate transparency and access to information for citizens. Through this new model, we're seeking to go beyond a platform of transparency or open information. What we are seeking is a new way to craft policies and to govern. In this new context, civil society has a fundamental role to play in relation to dialogue and cooperation with the state and private sector. Its role is duly institutionalized in the National Commission for an Open Government. The mandate of this body is to promote debates on how administration can guarantee transparency, access to information, and accountability. Mr. President, Costa Rica is committed to the mechanism for the review of implementation of the Convention. This year, we successfully concluded the final report of Bolivia, who we had the pleasure to review along with Zambia. In addition, my country is being reviewed by Venezuela and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We are currently concluding the executive summary. In addition, 1 month ago, we undertook a field visit to Cabo Verde, who we are reviewing along with Malawi. I must recognize that the direct dialogue with the authorities of Cabo Verde has been very fruitful. Mr. President, in addition to measures of national coordination between bodies and agencies involved in fighting corruption, of which there are more than 12 in Costa Rica, we would also like to inform the conference about a practice which we have been promoting in Costa Rica and which is linked to the commission of the crime of corruption. In Article number 38 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Attorney General's office is given legitimacy to recognize and make claims for acts of corruption. What we have noted is that there has not been a problem in relation to the implementation of this measure. We believe it's a useful instrument which could be of use to the international community, and we are ready to discuss this issue. To conclude, I would like to underscore the particular importance of the holding of this 6th conference, as, in line with what has been previously agreed, we must launch the 2nd review cycle of the Convention focused on preventive measures and asset recovery. Costa Rica hopes that in the coming days we will reach agreement on this issue, and that as a conference we will give a clear mandate to the Secretariat so that it will support the states parties in this important task. We have made important progress, but our work has not yet finished. We still have much to do. We believe that if we work together with good faith and enthusiasm, then we can achieve the ideals of this convention, and here in St. Petersburg we can make progress if we are filled with the hope and show true commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the permanent representative of Germany to the United Nations in Vienna, Ambassador Döbli, please.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the government of the Russian Federation for hosting the 6th session of the Conference of the State Parties. I would like to congratulate the new president of the conference and his vice presidents on their election. Germany is also very grateful to UNODC and to the Secretariat for organizing this States Parties Conference so diligently. Germany is very pleased to participate in this conference for the first time as a fully fledged member. Almost a year ago, on November 12, 2014, Germany ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Germany's ratification took this long because it follows from our legal understanding that ratification comes after, and only after, the adaptation of domestic law to the provisions of the Convention. New legislation entered into force in Germany in 2014, and this allowed us to finally ratify the Convention. The fight against corruption continues to be an important goal for Germany. The German Parliament, the Bundestag, recently adopted additional laws on combating corruption. It extends criminal liability for active and passive bribery in the private sector, and so Germany will also meet the non-binding provisions of Article 21 of the Convention. Furthermore, Germany will now go much further in criminalizing passive bribery on the part of foreign public officials. In addition, a draft bill to combat corruption in the healthcare sector was adopted by the federal government. The bill will cover cases, for example, where a pharmaceutical company pays bribes to medical doctors. This bill will end impunity for such cases. This conference will discuss the opening of the second review, or is discussing the opening of the second review cycle. Germany would like to reaffirm the points made by the European Union. We fully support the opening of the second review cycle. In addition, we would like to advocate the broadest possible participation of civil society in the second cycle. We want to ensure that the second cycle proceeds in a format that is practicable for all involved and in which the ratio of cost and effect remains reasonable. The second review cycle will focus on prevention, in our view, a topic of utmost importance. On prevention, we had to learn our lessons and continue to learn, including, of course, from the experience of other countries. One important lesson we have learned is that prevention programs must be tailor-made. Each and every administrative body and every commercial enterprise has its own specific risk structure, requiring individual and feasible solutions. As the German administration is highly decentralized, there is no central body responsible for prevention. In our federal system, extensive coordination is required. As a result of this coordination, solutions for mitigating corruption risks have been developed, which consists of a mixture of different elements. The German Federal Ministry of the Interior maintains a permanent exchange with top-level compliance officers from the private sector, including multinational companies. Deliverables produced in this context include, for example, guidelines for business. Large-scale corruption, as we all know, can still occur even if very consistent and strict rules exist on paper, but are not being implemented on the ground. In the second cycle, reviewing states should focus not only on the question of whether rules exist, but also on their implementation and enforcement in practice. Germany assists good governance reforms in partner countries worldwide. Currently, more than 60 German development cooperation projects foster anti-corruption and transparency measures. Supporting the implementation of the UNCAC continues to provide an excellent basis for the development of shared anti-corruption objectives and the identification of high priority measures adapted to the local context. The German government is convinced that the fight against corruption can only be won through a multidisciplinary approach of state and non-state actors, such as the recently launched Alliance for Integrity, a global partnership to strengthen integrity in the private sector. Civil society is a key actor in the fight against corruption. Germany is a long-standing partner of Transparency International and is proud to have been again one of the main partners for this year's International Anti-Corruption Conference in Malaysia. In that regard, the German government welcomes the initiative to further discuss the role of civil society. Fighting corruption has long since ceased to be a task for individual nations. Current investigations repeatedly reveal that payments are made to recipients abroad who then hide and launder the money as it passes through various hands. Investigating these offenses requires comprehensive and efficient cooperation between prosecutors. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption provides a sound basis because it contains rules specifying how assistance can be provided from abroad and how this assistance can be achieved. Let me give you an example. This year, Germany holds the presidency of the G7 group of states and is therefore organizing the Arab Forum on Asset Recovery. The aim is to bring G7 states, financial centers, and Arabic states around one table to discuss the specific challenges of recovering assets from former members of government and to provide all states involved in a single case with the opportunity to get to know one another and discuss the next steps in the investigation. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Germany is convinced that we are strong enough to take on all those who pose a threat to our system by corruption. We are offering every support we can muster. Thank you very much for your attention.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the representative of Finland, Director from the Ministry of Justice, Mr. Jotsen.
Good morning. As the representative of Finland here at the conference, we would like to offer our heartfelt condolences to the family and those close to those who were victims of the tragedy. Mr. Chairman, I would like to congratulate you on your election and assure you of Finland's full support. We in Nordic countries tend to be very brief and blunt. We would like to contribute to this conference by setting a mark. I will respect your 5-minute limit. I will try to go for 4 minutes. Finland does associate itself with the statement made on behalf of the European Union. We would like also to very warmly thank the Russian Federation for hosting this conference. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank you personally for your warm hospitality on Monday. Colleagues, we are coming to the end of the first cycle of the review. In Finland's view, we can be largely satisfied with the decisions that we made in Doha 6 years ago in setting up the review process. Above all, at that time, we decided to adopt, for the first time ever in connection with any United Nations treaty, a peer review mechanism, which requires countries at quite different levels of development, with quite different legal traditions and administrative traditions, and in some cases located in quite different parts of the world, to review one another. A very brave step taken in Doha. Several lessons have been learned over the past cycle. The process has been more time and resource consuming than had been anticipated many years ago. However, with more states parties joining and more country visits, both of which are signs of the vitality of UNCAC itself and of the review process, these are understandable developments. In this connection, we wish to express our warm appreciation to the UNODC for the sustained excellence in its assistance to states parties in implementation and in review. A second lesson is that every state party needs to improve its response. To our understanding, all of the reviews have provided recommendations for steps to be taken. Perhaps the most important lesson, however, in Finland's view, is that the peer review process works. It has yielded an extensive amount of information. Legal and administrative systems around the world have been improved. The ability to prevent, identify, and respond to corrupt practices has been improved. Good and very useful partnerships have been formed around the world. However, one issue continues to beset the review mechanism, and that is of cooperation with civil society. Finland is very concerned that this issue has become, in our view, quite surprisingly, a divisive and politicized issue. We are therefore pleased that here in St. Petersburg, we will have the opportunity to address this issue in connection with Agenda Item 7. Finland has undertaken to be constructive also in this respect by providing Conference Room Paper 3, which describes the evolution of this debate, identifies the various positions taken by all sides, the underlying arguments presented by the different sides, and identifies common ground. And there is indeed common ground, much to be found. We need to understand and to respect one another's positions and one another's concerns. It is only then that we can find our way forward in our common goal, and that is effective implementation of UNCAC. I would like to inform the plenary that informal consultations on Finland's conference room paper will be held today during lunch from 13:30 on in conference room C. You are all warmly welcome to those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the representative of Pakistan, the chairman of the National Accountability Bureau, Mr. Chowdhury, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I deem it an honor and a privilege to represent Pakistan at the 6th Conference of State Parties. At the outset, on behalf of the people and the government of Pakistan, I wish to express our deepest condolences over the tragic incident of the Russian plane crash a few days back, in which many precious lives were lost. We share the pain and grief of the bereaved families and friends. Our hearts and thoughts are with them. Mr. President, let me express my felicitations to you on your election as the President for the 6th session of the Conference of State Parties. I'm confident that under your able stewardship, the conference will fully achieve its objectives. I would also like to convey my felicitations to the other elected officers of the 6th COSP. I take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to the Russian Federation for hosting this conference in this beautiful and timeless city of St. Petersburg, as well as for making excellent arrangements for this event. The valuable preparatory work and support by the UNODC Secretariat is no less commendable. Mr. President, Pakistan associates itself with the statement delivered by the distinguished representative of Indonesia on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, and by the Republic of Korea on behalf of Asia-Pacific groups. Mr. President, the multifaceted evil of corruption constitutes a common challenge for the global community. No doubt it impedes sustainable socio-economic growth, undermines the rule of law, and negatively affects institutions. Besides, it provides succor to an array of other transnational organized crime. Curbing this menace requires concerted efforts at all levels, national, regional, and global. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption provides us the firm global foundation to pool our efforts and forge synergies in the field of anti-corruption based on the principles of the United Nations Charter. Its near universal membership attests to its validity. Mr. President, Pakistan is firmly committed to preventing and fighting corruption in all its forms. Ever since the ratification of the UN Convention Against Corruption in 2007, Pakistan has been a constructive partner of the global community in furthering the objectives of the Convention. On the national domestic front, the Pakistan Vision 2025 promises a comprehensive approach to strengthen the national anti-corruption regime. Excuse me. Pakistan has in place a robust legal, institutional, and administrative framework at the national level to fight the menace of corruption. The National Accountability Bureau, which I represent here, was established in 1999 and is the apex anti-corruption body in the country. It enjoys full administrative and financial independence and autonomy. Mr. President, Pakistan has participated actively in the first cycle of the review mechanism. We have reviewed 2 other states. Pakistan has also been reviewed recently. Our reviewers, Norway and Solomon Islands, were in Pakistan in September. The country review report is under finalization in consultation with the relevant stakeholders. We strongly support the launch of the second review cycle, which will focus on chapters 2 and 5. In our transition to the second cycle, we should fully preserve the principles and characteristics of the review mechanism. Mr. President, asset recovery is a fundamental pillar of the Convention. The NAB is the implementing agency regarding anti-money laundering laws, mutual legal assistance, and extradition. Mr. President, at the end, I would like to summarize by saying that I am confident that the present session of the conference would give further impetus to promoting synergies to combat the transnational crime of corruption. Participation in this conference has indeed been a very positive experience, and we carry back many lessons. I thank you all. Thank you very much.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the representative of Peru, the Charge d'Affaires of the Permanent Mission of Peru in Austria, Mr. Perez Alvan.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, firstly, we convey our sincere condolences to the government and people of the Russian Federation on the recent air accident and the terrible loss of human life. We offer solidarity to the families of the victims at this difficult time. Mr. President, on behalf of the Peruvian government, we convey our warm greetings and congratulations to you as you preside over this conference. We're sure it will be a success under your leadership. In addition, we express gratitude to the government of the Federation of Russia for hosting this important meeting. And we also welcome and express our gratitude to Panama for their work. My delegation supports and aligns itself with the intervention delivered by the Group 77 in China and GRULAC. Corruption is a cross-cutting phenomenon with economic, political, cultural, and moral consequences. These concern not only the state, but also the entire society, including private sector and civil society. Corruption weakens the very foundations of states and governance, affecting the inclusive development of its people. As such, Peru attaches the utmost importance to the UNCAC, the primary instrument which provides a comprehensive conceptual and legal framework for both domestic implementation and international cooperation. The government of Peru is committed to continue incorporating in its domestic policies and standards the obligations enshrined in the UNCAC. Peru has a high-level anti-corruption commission, the CAN. This brings together public institutions, civil society organizations, and business associations in the context of interinstitutional coordination and cooperation in fighting corruption. CAN has responsibility for coordinating and overseeing the achievement of our National Plan to Counter Corruption 2012-2016. This seeks to create institutional and normative transformation. In recent years, in the legislative sphere, the Peruvian government has continued to fine-tune the criminalization of bribery, embezzlement, and conflict of interest, as well as practices which facilitate asset laundering. One of the largest scourges to be addressed internationally is the so-called grand corruption. This involves the highest spheres of power. It involves also significant amounts of financial resources and seriously weakens state institutions through their fundamental structures. As such, Peru is also implementing an executive power anti-corruption strategy. Mr. President, in Peru, we believe that one of the main axes of our work should be the mainstreaming of information. To this end, the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Crimes of Corruption has created an online registry of prosecuted officials, those liable for civil compensation, and fugitives for the commission of crimes of corruption. In addition, the judiciary has implemented a system of anti-corruption jurisprudence where prosecutors can access easily and swiftly the written and oral legal decisions and resolutions. The Comptroller's Office of the Republic has also created a program of a reporting system program entitled Hello Business Watchdog, which addresses complaints emanating from the private sector in relation to corruption. The Comptroller's Office has also undertaken awareness raising and training work in preventing corruption through annual hosting of anti-corruption conferences, as well as organizing workshops and talks in the area of awareness raising. The Comptroller's Office also has a comprehensive web service entitled Infobras, established with German cooperation, and this allows citizens to follow the progress of public works. Moreover, we have a youth auditors program which seeks to bolster education and principles and values in the youth of Peru. Moreover, the Public Prosecutor's Office is also working in the education sector through a school prosecutors program to encourage good practices. Among new state proposals, the Ombudsman has crafted a draft law for the creation of a national authority of transparency and access to information, which is being revised under the Open Government Plan. In addition, Peru is working on a law to regulate the presentation of sworn declaration of interests as a complement to our system relating to asset and income declaration. The efforts of the Peruvian state can also be seen internationally through active participation in the follow-up mechanism to the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, as well as our efforts to accede to the OECD's Convention on Combating Bribery in International Business Transactions. Civil society also has an active role to play in the process of fighting corruption. It's important that governments cooperate with NGOs when it comes to reviewing and promoting the implementation of the UNCAC. We believe that the participation of relevant non-governmental organizations in the working groups could bring direct contributions from civil society to the mechanisms and bodies of this conference. The achievement of important advances in internal implementation as well as in international cooperation would not be possible without a follow-up mechanism to the comprehensive conceptual and legal framework provided by the UNCAC. The Peruvian state is absolutely convinced of the importance of the follow-up mechanism to the mandates established in the Convention. I'd like to recall that our country was one of the first to accede to the Convention, and since 2006 we've been participating on a voluntary basis in the pilot program for reviewing the implementation of the Convention's provisions. In 2012, we participated as a state under review and a reviewing state in the framework of the implementation the mechanism for the review of implementation. This was a useful process. As we come to the end of the first cycle, review cycle process, lessons learned must allow us to ensure the second review cycle is more focused, inclusive, effective, efficient, and transparent. Peru stands ready to participate in the second cycle in examining chapters on asset recovery and preventive measures. We believe that to ensure that the mechanism is sustainable over time, it must be financed from the regular budget. Mr. President, to conclude, Peru reiterates its commitment to the implementation of the Convention and offers its full support for the construction of a useful system of cooperation among our countries. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. I now call upon a representative of Gabon, the ambassador of Gabon to the Russian Federation, Ambassador Makongo.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, President. I am not, in fact, the ambassador of Gabon. I am Mr. Dieudonné Ouassi, President of the National Committee Against Corruption and Illicit Enrichment in Gabon. So it's in this capacity that I am speaking to you today. President, it is a great honor for me to represent my country, Gabon, here at the 6th session of the Conference of State Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Allow me firstly to address on behalf of the Gabonese people, the President and the government of Gabon, our heartfelt condolences to the people of Russia and in particular to the bereaved families here in the city of St. Petersburg following the plane crash. Then I wish to sincerely thank the authorities of the Russian Federation for their excellent organization and kind hospitality displayed to us all in this beautiful city of St. Petersburg. This demonstrates the importance attached by Russia to the convention and its implementation. Allow me then to present my heartfelt congratulations from the delegation of Gabon to you yourself, President, and to the members of the Bureau upon your election. President, Gabon has been a state party to the Merida Convention since the 13th of September 2004, and we subscribe to the statement made on behalf of the African Group, and we share the vision and commitment of the Convention to fight together against this scourge which knows no borders. If the state parties hesitate in this combat, which is a joint endeavor, then those who are corrupt and the corrupted will be ahead of us, as they will exploit the limits to our actions and will undermine the harmonious evolution of humanity, economic growth, and the fair redistribution of wealth. This is why Gabon encourages all countries, in particular those from Africa, to ratify the Merida Convention, which serves as the international legal reference document for state parties in the sphere of combating corruption. On a national level, President, Gabon is resolutely committed to combating corruption and money laundering in the context of its efforts to promote good governance and inclusive human development for all women and men in our country. In combating impunity, the Gabonese government has just revisited its penal code and its criminal procedural code. It did so on 11th of August 2015 in order to establish a special tribunal and an appeal court for economic and financial crime. This important reform provides these institutions with the appropriate tools to combat this plague and allows Gabon to accelerate its development. This commitment stems from the noble vision of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Gabon, who wishes to see a Gabon of integrity, prosperity and justice. This is illustrated by the adoption of a strategic document to combat corruption and money laundering. On the 19th of May 2015, the Prime Minister launched this strategy with the participation of all stakeholders. And this strategy targets prevention, awareness raising, capacity building of all stakeholders, and support for the fight against impunity, for corruption and money laundering. Corruption, which is a cancer which insidiously spreads through our societies and compromises the fundamental rights, human rights. These reforms support those activities conducted by the anti-corruption bodies and money laundering bodies, in particular the National Commission to Combat Illicit Enrichment, which was established on the 7th of May 2003, and the National Agency for the Investigation of Financial Crimes, responsible for detecting money laundering acts and acts to finance terrorism. And the Court of Auditors has oversight over the implementation of financial laws and public accounts. Gabon places young people at the heart of our anti-corruption activities. With the technical assistance of UNODC, we have highlighted raising awareness of the Merida Convention, and in the universities and higher education establishments, we have endeavored to establish different teaching modules, and the Faculty of Law and Economic Sciences established a master's level course in corruption offences, and Gabonese academicians have been trained in Vienna, this was in 2014, and now actively take part in all international meetings, such as the one in Doha and the one which just took place in Moscow in 2015. President, The participation of organized civil society as a stakeholder in combating corruption takes place in Gabon. Civil society takes an active part in our activities to prevent and denounce acts of corruption. It is also represented fully in bodies such as the National Commission to Combat Illicit Enrichment, the Agency for the Regulation of Public Markets, and the different bodies under the Strategic Plan to Combat Corruption and Money Laundering. It would be a shame to deprive ourselves of the major input that civil society can make to our work and all of their experience. I call upon all state parties at this session to see to what extent civil society could actively participate in our work. All of these efforts conducted by Gabon are encouraging. We can see that we are now rated first amongst the Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa, CEMAC, by Transparency International in 2014 in their report Doing Business 2015 of the World Bank as well. President, at an international level, Gabon has proceeded to review Lesotho in 2012 and Greece in 2014 in the context of the first review cycle of the Merida Convention's application. In April 2015, Gabon was reviewed by Laos and Sierra Leone. All of this represents a wealth of experience. This has been consolidated each time by fruitful exchanges and country visits, which allowed us to question, with this external view, our domestic legislation and practices to combat corruption. And so I would pay tribute here to the Secretariat of UNODC, in particular for their skill as an interface and facilitator of these exchanges between reviewing and reviewed countries. After the country visit to Gabon, Gabon was able to instigate immediately the necessary and vital reforms to integrate certain provisions of the Convention into domestic law. Now, money laundering is an offence against the economic and financial governance of our country, sanctioned by special courts established for this. This new legislation also establishes crimes of corruption in the private sector. Now, those responsible for legal entities and the managers of these can be sanctioned in criminal proceedings. Criminalization with no statute of limitations of violent crimes, often linked to trafficking in organs and animals, has also led to stricter sanctions punishing passive and active corruption. And so it established a special law, an anti-corruption law, in the context of the strategic fight against corruption and money laundering as well. President, Gabon does not want to see a reduced vision, a limited vision of an isolated fight against corruption. To combat transboundary corruption, illicit movements of capitals, tax evasion and money laundering, Gabon hosted on the 7th, 8th and 9th of October 2015 a workshop to launch the Network of National Anti-Corruption Authorities from Central Africa, RENAC. For the transitional period, Gabon is presiding over RENAC, and RENAC is headquartered in Libreville, the capital of Gabon. The objective of RENAC is to create synergy between anti-corruption activities at national level, capacity building for member institutions through specific training programs, and to offer them a framework for cooperation and the exchange of information and experience. This networking at a sub-regional level for anti-corruption activities supplements the continental scale activities in September 2014 in Accra, in Ghana, launching the African Association for Anti-Corruption Authorities, AAACA. The Vice President is held by Gabon and I myself. All of these organizations are important platforms for international cooperation conducive to the proper application of the Merida and Maputo Conventions. President, I would like to conclude by saying that we should build upon the experience we have had in the first review cycle, and Gabon is in favor of launching the second review cycle, taking account of the lessons learned during the first cycle. Thank you very much, President.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the representative of Kenya, the ambassador and permanent representative of Kenya to the United Nations, Mr. Oyugi.
Mr. President, the Kenya delegation joins other delegations in expressing condolences to the government and people of the Russian Federation following the plane crash last Saturday. We also take this opportunity to congratulate you and the Bureau on your election to preside over this session. And we are very much grateful to the government of Russia and the people of the Russian Federation for the warm hospitality and excellent arrangements made for this conference. Mr. President, Kenya associates itself with the statements of the African Group and the Group of G77. Kenya fully supports the implementation of UNCAC as it provides the most objective framework for a global onslaught on corruption. It is no wonder that the convention has attained near universal ratification. We are happy to inform that Kenya successfully underwent its implementation review, which was performed by Cape Verde and Papua New Guinea, and the report of which was finalized in September, just 2 months ago. The report has noted some best practices in our anti-corruption model, which include the use of an integrated public complaints referral mechanism and the adoption of a multi-sectoral approach to fighting corruption through the Kenya Integrity Plan. The report further notes that Kenya is largely compliant with its UNCAC obligations and that we need to enhance mechanisms for enforcing our anti-corruption laws and also criminalize illicit enrichment and trading in influence. We have accepted the recommendations and are working on an implementation framework. Mr. President, it's acknowledged that political will hugely boosts the fight against corruption. Under the leadership of His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, Kenya has taken significant steps in the fight against corruption. For instance, while giving his second annual State of the Nation address to Parliament in March this year, the President asked top state officers, including 5 ministers, who are subject of corruption investigations, to step aside from their positions pending the conclusion of the investigations. Likewise, in March this year, the government appointed a task force to review the legal, policy, and institutional framework for fighting corruption in Kenya. One of the reference documents used by the task force was indeed the UNCAC Country Review Report. On its part, the Kenyan Parliament has demonstrated renewed vigor in supporting the fight against corruption. This has been through various measures such as enactment of various pieces of legislation, anti-corruption laws, enhanced budgetary allocation to various anti-corruption agencies, and vetting of senior state officers before appointment by the President. Mr. President, in line with its preventive approach to fighting corruption, Kenya has introduced far-reaching measures. Notable amongst these are compulsory requirements that all payments from the government be made on ICT-based platforms so as to reduce human contact. Another one is the establishment of one-stop centers, known as Huduma centers, in which the government provides essential services to the citizens. The Huduma Center concept, in fact, won Kenya the 2015 UN Public Service Award in improving delivery of public services. Additionally, Kenya has adopted an integrated financial management system geared towards enhanced transparency and accountability in the management of public funds. Kenya has also adopted an ICT-based e-citizen platform through which citizens can apply and pay for passports, driving licenses, business registration, and other necessary documents online. On asset recovery, we strongly appreciate the confiscation of corruptly acquired assets and appreciate the good work done by the Working Group on Asset Recovery. Kenya has strengthened the capacity of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission and the Asset Recovery Agency. Furthermore, Kenya is an active member of the Asset Recovery International Network and currently serves as the president of the Asset Recovery International Network for East Africa. On international cooperation, Kenya continues to work with several states. However, we are concerned about the legal and administrative bottlenecks that frustrate the return of stolen assets, especially from some developed countries. We therefore reiterate our call to recipient countries of illicitly acquired assets to repatriate the same to the countries of origin and remove all barriers to asset recovery. On technical assistance, Kenya has identified various needs, such as modern legislation and the use of special investigative techniques. And we acknowledge the support we have received from UNODC, UNDP, and GIZ in this respect. In conclusion, Mr. President, Kenya reiterates its commitment to supporting international and regional efforts towards fighting corruption, and we particularly look forward to participating in the second cycle of the UNCAC review focusing on prevention and asset recovery. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I now call upon the representative of Jordan, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in Vienna, Mr. Hayasat.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at the outset, I'd like to express our heartfelt condolences to the government of Russia and the friendly people of the Russian Federation on the occasion of the tragic death in the plane crash recently. Mr. President, I'd like to also congratulate you and the members of your bureau for the election to this office, and I am more than sure that your expertise will render this conference of ours a success. And I also would like to express our appreciation and gratitude to the Russian government for their generous hospitality and the great arrangements and organization of hosting this event. And at the same time, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for their efforts in preparing the documentation, facilitating the organization of the event. Mr. President, we meet in this conference of ours after a very short period when the United Nations General Assembly has adopted the Transforming Our World, the 2030 Sustainable Development Plans just last September, which really has given much importance to enhancing the rule of law, fighting corruption, and the recovery of stolen assets, which yet again emphasizes the importance of international regional cooperation in fighting corruption and making sure that it alleviates its negative impact. In this context, we have the Sustainable Development Goal 16 as part of the Sustainable Development for 2030 is of paramount importance in order to continue to implement the recommendations that are available in the aftermath of the first review cycle, and as we prepare to launch the second review in order to be able to achieve and implement the objectives of the UNCAC, as well as take into consideration the lessons learned, the best practices, and to address the challenges that appeared at the end of the review cycle. In addition to that, we have to expedite the pace of the asset recovery process through enhancing international cooperation. Mr. President, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, under the leadership of His Majesty King Abdullah II bin al-Hussein, is keen on enhancing the efforts to combat corruption, enhancing transparency, ensuring accountability for a society that is based on equity, social justice, and the respect for human rights and basic freedoms. Jordan, as of the date it ratified the UNCAC, ensures that it continues to adapt the requirements and the provisions within its own national legislation to the UNCAC in order to uproot corruption. In this regard, the Anti-Corruption Commission law focuses on the impact of the review implementation mechanism and given the Commission a larger mandate in order to combat corruption, particularly when it comes to mutual legal assistance, recovery of criminal proceeds, and also including the officials of the international organizations and the foreign public officials in this regard. And in witness thereof, we have issued regulation number 62 of 2014 that regulates all the details of this issue. And Jordan will continue incessantly to issue such pieces of legislation, such as the right to access information, and also the illicit enrichment law 2014 and the financial disclosure law in this regard. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan launched its second national anti-corruption strategy 2013 to 2017 based on many documentation and reports, such as those that review the performance of Jordan's adherence to the implementation of the UNCAC. And this strategy has based on achieving the goals of the UNCAC, including making sure that impunity is not allowed or no one is granted immunity, and we wanted to focus more on the international cooperation. In technical assistance and capacity building, Jordan has hosted a number of international conferences, regional workshops as well on international cooperation, including mutual legal assistance, which we have responded to positively, and getting engaged in the STAR initiative by the World Bank, and also focusing on enhancing the integrity of the judiciary. And within the preparations of the second review cycle, Jordan has formed a national task force with the membership of various state agencies, civil society, oversight bodies, in collaboration with the UNDP, and we held a training course for the national team or task force members to train them on the self-assessment checklist process. And then the task force was broken into 4 groups to review the items related to having effective coordinated policies, public service, public procurement, the role of the public and private sectors, and also enhancing the engagement of the public and the civil society. This is the very first experience of its nature in the Arab region within the public-private partnership and partnership with the civil society. At the end, Jordan reiterates its commitment to enhance its cooperation with the other states and international and regional organizations, and it expresses its full support to UNODC to conduct its mandate in contributing to enhancing the national and international anti-corruption efforts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And I'll call upon the representative of Norway, the senior advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Rudy.
Mr. President, I thank the government of the Russian Federation and the city of St. Petersburg for hosting the 6th Conference of State Parties. Our appreciations also go to the UNODC for organizing this important meeting and preparing the conference documents and background. Let me at the outset convey our deepest condolences to the families and persons involved and affected by the tragic crash of the Russian airplane in Sinai this last weekend. Norway was aligned to the intervention held on behalf of the European Union. In addition, my delegation would like to underline a few major points. A bit more than a month ago, the new Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in New York. We know from experience that corruption threatens development, peace, and security. Acceptance of corruption and corrupt practices undermines governments and the rule of law. If we are to be successful in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, we also have to be successful in cooperating on deterring corruption. Corruption is up front in Goal 16 of the SDGs. If we are to fight corruption effectively, all parties have to show political will, not only to fight corruption at national or local level, but also will to cooperate internationally to fulfill the aims and objectives of the UNCAC. That requires willingness to openness and transparency. Unfortunately, we do not see sufficient willingness to openness by all state parties to the convention, and that is a concern. There is a potential for improvement. There is a clear correlation between openness of the society and corruption. We have to admit that authorities, or we as state parties to the convention alone, cannot prevent corruption. To prevent corruption, we need help from other stakeholders in the societies in which we live. Without a system of checks and balances, it's hard to cope with corruption. Experience has shown that societies with active and critical media and strong civil society are better placed to fight corruption. The role of civil society, free, independent media and academia should be promoted. UNCAC was developed by us as a collective response. We own the convention. It must be implemented in an effective way to secure prevention, asset recovery and international cooperation. Acceptance of corruption and corrupt practices makes it possible for criminal groups to operate and grow. There is a clear correlation between corruption and governance. Good governance means generally less corruptive practices. Norway welcomed the adoption of the review mechanism for the implementation of UNCAC to assist countries in the effective implementation. We now have collected experiences from the first review cycle of the mechanism, and there are both positive and negative experiences. There are elements that could be done better in the next phase of the implementation of the Convention, and there are positive elements that should be continued. Norway has been a strong proponent for participation of NGOs, civil society and academia, both in the implementation of the Convention as well as in policy discussions and development of norms internationally. We still think it should be to the benefit of all if we allow for participation of NGOs and non-state actors as observers both at the meetings of the state parties as well as in the implementation review group and in the subsidiary bodies of the Convention. And we think that the rules of procedures, the Convention itself, and ECOSOC rules provide for that. We are all aware of the fact that not all participating states share our view, but we hope to reach increased understanding for the value of involving the knowledge, expertise, and views of both public and private partners, relevant national, regional, and international organizations, development organizations, and NGOs. Only if we are willing to show inclusiveness and having an open mind, we will get the best results. Corruption should not be dealt with as an isolated topic. Robust anti-corruption measures are crucial elements in any successful resource management policy, any tax or public spending policy, or any development policy. An effective anti-corruption policy is not only about establishing anti-corruption authorities in line with the Convention. The anti-corruption authorities also need a mandate and real political support. They have to operate in a way that earns trust in the public. Confidence is key and is to be earned. They are there to fight corruption, which is one of the most difficult tasks one can undertake. Lessons learned from Norway have been that measures to increase transparency and to identify illicit financial flows have contributed substantially in our fight against organized crime and corruption. Thank you, Mr. President.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. I now call upon a representative of Chile, the First Secretary of the Permanent Mission of Chile to the international organizations in Vienna, Mr. Lamaliate, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. Firstly, I would like to convey the condolences of my country to the people and government of the Russian Federation on the tragic air disaster in Sinai. And we express gratitude for the welcome we've received in St. Petersburg. Mr. President, allow me to congratulate you on your election as President of this conference, as well as to congratulate the other members of the Bureau. You can count on the full cooperation of the delegation of Chile to ensure that our work is successful. In addition, we express gratitude to the Federation of Russia for the hospitality shown to delegations participating at this great event. We would like to place on record the appreciation of Chile to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. The UNODC undertakes excellent work not only in preparing this conference but also in its usual work of supporting implementation of the Convention, whether it be through the mechanism or the subsidiary bodies of the conference. Mr. President, corruption is a phenomenon which affects all countries to one degree or another. It finds its origin in different situations, but it represents a threat to human security as it attacks the stability, governability, and developmental possibilities of states and our societies. Through its very nature, corruption is rarely visible. Therefore, beyond citizens' perception, it's extremely difficult to have full knowledge of its impact or scope in any state at any given moment in time. This gives rise to one of its most serious consequences, that ignorance in relation to the true nature and scope of corruption leads to policies developed in countries which do not always boast the most adequate scope or objectives as a result of a lack of focus. Corruption harms the efficiency of states, diverts and diminishes resources for the functioning and implementation of governmental policies. If we agree that the development of a country requires adequate functioning on the part of its institutions, then corruption has a double impact on development. Economically, it generates inefficient use of public resources, and it also destabilizes the legal order which sustains development and the legal order which enables an environment which is propitious to foreign investment. However, the major political damage of corruption lies in its political effects, since its impact on democratic institutions can be significant and harm the institutional stability of a country and, as a result, the fulfillment of projects and harmonious development in the long term. Mr. President, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption enshrines a set of principles to which states must aspire to apply, as well as recommendations on operating mechanisms in the civil, administrative, and criminal spheres for preventing and punishing corruption. These principles are transparency, equity, probity, integrity, and responsibility in public service and resources. The Convention establishes a follow-up mechanism on the implementation of commitments entered into upon signing of the Convention. These are participatory in nature and seek to harmonize policies among member states. At this time, we are marking 5 years since the launch of the mechanism in Doha. We have come here with the firm commitment to launch the second review cycle. We believe we must apply lessons learned in this 5-year period to render the mechanism much more efficient, both in the use of resources and in achieving objectives envisaged in the Convention. That's why we believe that a series of practical measures must be implemented without changing the guiding principles and characteristics of the mechanism. We must fine-tune the implementation of the Convention and cooperation among member states. For example, we believe that we can program the meetings of the working groups together with those of the implementation review group, and this will allow us to take full advantage of these bodies, as well as to enhance cooperation in the review mechanism, both regionally and internationally, and avoid duplication of work. We also believe the IORG must start now to analyze first cycle results, taking into account all elements which have emerged, such as successes, good practices, challenges, observations, and technical assistance needs identified by the Secretariat. Mr. President, Chile is fully aware of the magnitude of the problem of corruption and therefore has assumed, in addition to acceding to UNCAC and the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, numerous international commitments. For example, Chile is part of the International Anti-Corruption Academy, the Open Government Partnership, the working groups of APEC, and the Convention Combating Bribery of Foreign Public Officials in International Business Transactions of the OECD, as well as its Anti-Bribery Working Group. Against this backdrop and to the end of fulfilling obligations contained in international instruments acceded to by my country, we have enhanced legal provisions to punish corrupt acts, criminalize specific forms of crime. We've broadened jurisdiction of Chilean courts to engage in investigation, and we have established criminal responsibility of legal persons in relation to asset laundering, financing of terrorism, bribery, and other crimes. More recently, we've implemented measures seeking to ensure the good conduct of public officials in their daily work. Among these projects, I highlight the establishment of a code of ethics in training and administration of officials to prevent and combat corruption. We also highlight the project which seeks to remove anyone participating in corrupt acts from their position. This has been approved in the Senate's first constitutional process stage. Moreover, in relation to the private sector, we have approved provisions which seek the prevention and addressing of issues such as conflicts of interest, money laundering, in an effective way to target, in particular, the activity of lobbyists. To conclude, under no circumstances should efforts be limited to mere state action. Combating corruption requires concerted action assumed by all society at all levels for it to be effective. Only in this way, through active participation by civil society, can we address corruption, remove its breeding grounds, and assure the adequate use of institutions and their resources for the well-being of all our citizens. Thank you.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. And now call upon the representative of the Marshall Islands, the Chief of Investigations of the Office of the Auditor General, Mr. Anjan.
Mr. President, please allow me to begin by joining others who have spoken before me in offering, on behalf of the Marshall Islands, our sincere condolences to the government and people of the Russian Federation, especially the families of those who lost their lives in the tragedy that took place over the weekend. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, colleagues and friends, fellow Pacific Islanders, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend warm greetings of Yahweh from President Cristobal Loyac and the people of the Marshall Islands to you all at this 6th session of the Conference of the State Parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation to the government of the Russian Federation for hosting this important event in this beautiful city. Allow me to start with an expression in my own native tongue, Tuwak by Ilumajanono. It literally means face your challenge. However, we use it as meaning that even in challenges, there are opportunities. This is relatable to how one can fight corruption. There are numerous setbacks, but there are opportunities, and it's well worth the effort. The Marshall Islands is one of 15 Pacific Island countries, covering 70 square miles, comprising of 29 coral atolls, just over 1,000 islands in the North Pacific. We have a population of less than 70,000 people. Our challenges in preventing and fighting corruption are similar to other small island states, but are currently compounded by additional challenges, notably climate change. I am pleased to inform this conference that the Marshall Islands has participated in and subsequently concluded our first cycle of the peer review mechanism, namely on chapters 3, criminalization and law enforcement, and 4, international cooperation of the convention. On behalf of the Marshall Islands government, I would like to thank the reviewing experts from Central African Republic and Papua New Guinea, as well as officials from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. It is worthwhile to mention that under the UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project, UNODC held a training for prosecutors and law enforcement on how to investigate and prosecute corruption offenses. Later, UNODC, in collaboration with UNDP and the Australian government, held a workshop for relevant government officials as well as civil society organizations on the key findings from the Marshall Islands' review. Again, our gratitude to UNODC and special thanks to UNDP and Australia for facilitating these important workshops in relation to the convention. I would like to advise this conference that the Marshall Islands government has accepted the recommendations from Marshall Islands' review. With the conclusion of the review, the Marshall Islands now has a baseline from which it can consider technical assistance needs and areas to prioritize. One such priority is to improve the capacity of the relevant government offices. As a Pacific Island country, as well as a small island developing state, addressing ongoing challenges such as nuclear issue and climate change, capacity constraint is a critical issue. To that end, I would like to note that UNODC and UNDP are helping out with the Marshall Islands Financial Intelligence Unit, which is another instrumental factor in implementing the UNCAC. We look forward to the continued support from our development partners and this conference in this regard. Although RMI's review of chapters 3 and 4 has concluded, the Marshall Islands does not want to stop here, but continue with its obligation under the convention and improving our anti-corruption framework. Legislation policy means of coordination. When we improve how we work and our legal foundation, we will improve as a country and as a people. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Marshall Islands. Komoltada.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. And now I'll call upon the representative of Belgium, the Consul General, Mr. Kumps.
Monsieur le Président,
President, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, the Belgian delegation wishes to present to the Russian authorities and to the families of all of the victims and to those close to the victims our most sincere condolences following the accident concerning the Russian plane in Egypt. Belgium is delighted to be with you today as a party to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. On the 25th of September 2008, Belgium ratified the convention, thus formalizing its commitment to counter those practices which constitute a grave threat to the proper functioning of states and which undermine the principles of fair competence and equity. Our review cycle under the United Nations Convention Against Corruption will soon be concluded. We have also been appointed as reviewers for Spain and Turkey. The efforts deployed in combating corruption are manifold. We would recall that our country has been a member of GRECO, a group of states against corruption, since its creation in 1999, and is also a member of the Working Group Against Transnational Corruption of the OECD since its creation in 1999. The fight against corruption is never-ending, and given the global nature of this evil, we cannot rest on our laurels. We must always endeavor to improve our legislation in the light of our international commitments and obligations, and of course, we should implement international standards into our legislation. Currently, a bill is under discussion in the Belgian Parliament to increase sentences related to international corruption offences, as suggested by the OECD. The most recent tool that we have in our legal arsenal to combat corruption that we would like to present to the 6th session of Conference of State Parties Against Corruption is a circular from the Prosecutor General's office dating from the 2nd of October 2015. This circular determines the criminal policy, provides practical guidelines to prosecutors from the Public Prosecutor's Office to encourage the effective treatment of cases, and recalls to public prosecutors the national and international legal framework for public corruption offences, private corruption offences, embezzlement, undue advantage and misappropriation by a person occupying public office. It recalls the international conventions and the constituent elements of crimes, the sentences and aggravating circumstances, special investigative measures, and the statutes of limitations. This circular also recalls the gravity of the phenomenon that is corruption. Cases of public corruption, embezzlement, and undue advantage and misappropriation by a person exercising public office should be dealt with as a priority. Particular attention should be paid to those cases which deal with acts of corruption committed by foreign public officials. This circular contains guidelines for the treatment of cases, the mandatory appointment of a special prosecutor for cases of public corruption, embezzlement, undue advantage and misappropriation by a public official, the systematic sharing of information at all stages of the procedures, and information sharing on all difficulties encountered at each stage of the procedures, active observance of time limits in dealing with the cases, mastery of the subject of the cases, seizure of any proceeds of crimes, following up on letters rogatory at international level, the management of any criminal transactions, entering information into the computer databases, information to the hierarchy, and communication of jurisprudence. Moreover, President, Belgium is particularly aware of the mechanism for the review of application of the Convention. Belgium has circulated to the 6th conference a conference room paper aiming to promote the streamlining of the review exercise in the sphere of anti-corruption activities, aiming also to develop synergy between the different secretariats when dealing with the self-assessment checklist and also in the planning of in-situ visits in the context of different reviews. This Belgian proposal bases itself in particular upon Resolution 3/1 adopted by the Conference of State Parties in Doha in 2009. We very much hope that this sixth session will provide us with an opportunity to draw lessons from the first review cycle and to develop best practice so that states and secretariats can streamline work linked to international review processes and improve the efficiency of the review mechanism. We note with satisfaction that this streamlining principle for review exercises has been taken up in the joint declaration of the European Union. To conclude, President, I would like to wish this conference every success here at the sixth session under your able guidance. And I wish you personally every success, President. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now I'll call upon the representative of Nauru, the Deputy Secretary for Justice and Border Control, Ms. Waka.
Omojoran, good morning. Honorable Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege to present this statement on behalf of the Republic of Nauru. We would like to thank the host country, the Russian Federation, for being such gracious hosts and allowing us to experience your wonderful culture and hospitality. We also express our sincere condolences, particularly to the families of those lost as a result of the air tragedy. Nauru congratulates the President on the conference on his presidential ascension and acknowledges the diligence of the Secretariat and its stakeholders which have made this auspicious event possible. Mr. Chairman, Nauru is the smallest republic in the world. We have a population of approximately 10,000, and we live on an island in the Pacific Ocean, 8.1 square kilometers squared in size. However, since we ratified the convention back in 2012, for every year we have participated in a review, one of which being our own. In 2012, Nauru commenced our review process in country, and we hosted the in-country review panelists in 2014. We would like to express our appreciation to Timor-Leste, Jamaica, and the Secretariat for providing experts who were professional, insightful, and whose contributions were progressive. The experience for Nauru was a positive one, and the process contributed to Nauru's anti-corruption regime. In 2014, Nauru had the privilege of being part of the panel of experts reviewing the lovely Republic of Cyprus, along with experts from Germany and the Secretariat. Once again, thank you to the experts, and we'd also express our sincere gratitude to Cyprus for being such gracious hosts and for facilitating and actively participating in the review. We commend your efforts. Just last month, Nauru again was a panelist for the Republic of Honduras. Along with the Dominican Republic and the Secretariat, we acknowledge the panelists and thank you for your contribution, as well as acknowledge the gracious hostings of Honduras, who actively participated in the review. As I said, Honourable Chair, Nauru has participated in a review for every 3 years since we acceded to the convention. This shows our commitment to this process. We'd also like to share with the plenary the progresses thus far. As part of Nauru's commitment to combating money laundering and the financing of terrorism, Nauru had implemented a comprehensive AML CFT regime, which in part has resulted in Nauru attracting a reputable bank back to the island. Nauru had previously been without a functioning bank for over 15 years, post the financial crisis and OECD non-compliant listing. I am pleased to report that Nauru is no longer on this list. The AML CFT regime is a priority supported by the government of Nauru through the efforts of the Department of Justice, the Department of Finance, Law Enforcement, and the Financial Intelligence Unit. Nauru is an active participant of the Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering. The first draft of the new Public Service Act has been completed and will cover the conduct of public officials and should be a deterrent to public servants who engage in corrupt behavior. Earlier this year, Nauru enacted the Cybercrimes Act, which will assist Nauru in dealing with relevant offences committed through cyber interfaces. Mr. Chairman, the Parliament of Nauru recently set up a select committee for the purpose of considering a law that will contribute to good governance by ensuring transparent and accountable dealing of leaders. The definition of leader is likely to include not just public leaders such as the President, Speaker of Parliament and Members of Parliament, but also include the Commissioner of Police, the Chief Secretary, heads of departments, state-owned enterprises and their boards. The Leadership Code, as it is known, has undergone wide public consultations, with the first draft having been presented before the Select Committee. The Code will cover ethical conduct for leaders, which will include addressing issues such as conflict of interests, declarations of conflicts, prohibited contracts, the abuse of public property, the misuse of official information. The Parliamentary Select Committee is also considering the establishment of an Integrity Commissioner as part of the legal reforms. Mr. Chairman, Nauru is also in a considerable reform of its criminal code, which will look at implementing offences that are included in UNCAC, as well as predicate offences which are not covered by the AML regime currently in Nauru. As part of Nauru's ongoing commitment to law and justice sector, Nauru now has, for the first time, 3 senior jurists appointed to the Supreme Court. Previously, the resident magistrate acted as the registrar for the Supreme Court. This was not ideal. An experienced judge has now been engaged and now sits as the registrar of the Supreme Court. There have also been human resource expansions within the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, with the hiring of 2 more lawyers and a paralegal. Nauru now has a Public Defender's Office, which is staffed by 2 lawyers, a pleader, and a paralegal. Mr. Chair, even with the progress made thus far, there are still constraints that need to be addressed. Aside from the general issues of corruption as identified globally, there is a need to obtain substantive baseline information about risk indicators at a national level. A more strategic approach informed by national analysis would allow us to target efforts more effectively and allow support agencies to contextualize the types of assistance provided to us. Technical capacity building for strategic sectors is continuously required. The reliance on consultants does not provide sustainable solution and is expensive. It also often lacks contextualized approaches. This is why Nauru supports the efforts of the UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project, which has been successful in providing Pacific as well as Nauru-centric assistance, while being mindful at the same time of relevant international developments. We support more regional efforts given the expense associated with attendance of international meetings and fora. We'd like to see more regional and national workshops with an in-country focus. We also seek assistance in establishing substantive baseline information about preventative measures to combat corruption and welcome advice and support from the plenary and country delegations. Mr. Chairman, in concluding, Nauru reaffirms its commitment to combating corruption in all its forms and supports substantive and collaborative partnerships with state parties and relevant agencies in this endeavour. We acknowledge the tireless efforts of the Secretariat and particularly want to commend the team at the UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project, who have been a vital resource in support to Nauru. We look forward to a productive and successful session. Matoba.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wenger. Now call upon the representative of Turkey, head of the Prime Ministry Inspection Board, Mr. Baysa.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to extend our heartfelt condolences to the people and the government of the Russian Federation because of the tragic accident that occurred on 31st October. Please accept deep sympathies of our delegation and Turkish peoples. Mr. President, I would like to extend our congratulations on your election as the President of the conference. You can count on the close cooperation and support of our delegation during the sessions. I would also like to express our appreciation for the government of the Russian Federation for their hospitality in convening the 6th Conference of the State Parties of the UN Convention Against Corruption. In addition, we appreciate all efforts and support of the UNODC Secretariat for the excellent work which has helped us in preparing for the discussions. Mr. President, corruption is an act unacceptable by any moral or legal standard. It's a plague that damages social values, undermines the sense of justice, and harms equality while generating unjust gains and unfair advantages for its perpetrators and frustrating those who abide by the rules. It poses a serious threat to justice, human rights, democratic institutions, rule of law, as well as global growth, trade, and the economic development. As emphasized by the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, in the Crime Congress that was held in April 2015 in Doha, crime feeds on corruption and obstructs good governance. The corruption problem, while varies in its form, substance, frequency, or intensity, exists worldwide. This is a phenomenon that transcends national boundaries. Without solid international cooperation and united response from the member states, international organizations, interest groups, including the private sector and the other relevant actors, the chance for complete success to defeat this evil is unlikely. The UNCAC is an available legal instrument to address this multidimensional and multinational problem. It indicates the determination of the international community to prevent and eradicate the corrupt acts. The provisions and principles enshrined in the Convention, as well as the mechanisms set up for the implementation, are significant tools to tackle with the corruption issue. Conference of the State Parties is the highest platform to review the overall performance of the Convention, as well as giving us an opportunity to scrutinize on the issues such as review of implementation, prevention, international cooperation, technical assistance, and asset recovery. Mr. President, implementation review mechanism set up under the Convention is a dynamic component which enables state parties to strengthen their legislation and practice against corruption. Turkey attaches utmost importance to this mechanism and fully supports its work. Turkey's review process for the first cycle is about to finalized. We are grateful for the great work done by the reviewing states, namely Belgium and Malaysia. Turkey has also completed its task as a reviewing state of Australia. When it comes to budgetary issues of the implementation of the review process, an efficient and impartial functioning of the review mechanism must be secured by the provision of sufficient funds. In return, a balanced and well-streamlined budget must be pursued all the stages of the review process. Having in this mind, and as a response to call of the Secretariat in this direction, we are glad to inform that Turkey has declined to earmark an amount of $50,000 as a financial contribution to the review mechanism for the second cycle. We believe that in this financial contribution demonstrates the political support of our government for the efforts exerted and progress achieved under this mechanism. Mr. President, regarding the prevention of corruption, we commend the work carried out so far by the Prevention Working Group. It goes without saying that it is an obligation for each state party to implement effective anti-corruption policies that encourage the wide participation from the society and that are established upon the guiding principles such as rule of law, management of public finance, transparency, accountability, and integrity. Forming anti-corruption bodies, defining clear code of conduct for the public officials, taking further steps for anti-money laundering, preserving a solid and independent judiciary are the key factors in the success for the prevention. We also believe that the efforts in this field should continue to focus on the private sector. Public-private partnership in this vein is a must. On the other hand, tackling this problem requires strong international cooperation. In this vein, the Convention also provides us with an important guideline that defines the basis of such cooperation regarding the issues of the extradition, mutual legal assistance, and transfer of sentenced persons or criminal proceedings. State parties should also cooperate with one another in line with their domestic legislation to promote in the information sharing and joint action among the law enforcement authorities. In this context, facilitating the exchange of information and collection of good practice among some parties are the essential means for furthering anti-corruption efforts. Asset recovery is another major fight of the fight against corruption. The international community needs to take further actions to secure the return of proceeds of corruption and stolen assets to the country of origin. It is important to build confidence between requesting and requested states through cooperation between their respective financial intelligence units and anti-corruption agencies. Mr. President, fighting corruption has been one of the Turkey's priorities as the current term president of the G20. During our presidency, we have closely monitored the effective implementation of the 2015-2016 Anti-Corruption Action Plan. Turkish presidency has also closely worked with the relevant international organizations and has given particular importance to the fight against corruption in the private sector. As part of our efforts in this area, we have emphasized the transparency in government-business relations. Strengthening the accountability for public officials and enhancing the transparency have been among other key areas that have been focused during the G20 anti-corruption working group meetings. Mr. President, this year we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the United Nations. The 2030 Development Agenda that was recently adopted should motivate the member states to take further and more ambitious steps to reach the specified ends. In this vein, we welcome the fact that Goal 16 has specific targets to substantially reduce the corruption and bribery in all their forms, and to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. We believe that our success in the fight against corruption will play a decisive role in further consolidating our good governance and sustainable economic growth. I would like to assure you once again on Turkey's commitment to make a genuine effort to bring this conference to a successful conclusion.
Thank you.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. Now call upon the representative of Haiti, the Director for Operations and for follow-up to anti-corruption conventions, Ms. Pijot.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I would like to firstly express my condolences to the Russian people on behalf of the government of Haiti for the recent tragedy which cost so many lives. Mr. President, heads of delegation, esteemed members of delegations, it's an honor for the Republic of Haiti to be here in St. Petersburg to share with our peers our experience in combating corruption. First and foremost, I would like to thank the government of the Russian Federation for the warm welcome given to our delegation since we arrived in this beautiful country. I would also like to thank the UNODC, in particular members of the Secretariat, for the high-quality organization of this session. In addition, Mr. President, I would like to congratulate you on your election as President of the session, and we assure you of our full cooperation in the successful fulfillment of your task. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, for more than a decade, the international community, through the United Nations, has entered into the commitment to fight with determination corruption and its manifestations and all its forms in all countries. Haiti, as a member of this great community since its creation, joined this fight by ratifying the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Indeed, like other member states of the United Nations, my country ratified the Merida Convention by decree on the 14th of May 2007. Following the signing of the convention, several institutions were created to effectively fight against corruption. They were the National Public Procurement Commission, the Inspectorate General of Finance, and the Anti-Corruption Unit, the ULCC. The ULCC has its own legal personality and administrative autonomy. Among other missions, it seeks to investigate corruption offences and transmits its reports to the judiciary. Moreover, the Anti-Corruption Unit is mandated to craft a national strategy to prevent corruption. In this context, on the 16th of March 2009, the Governmental Council adopted the National Strategy Document for Combating Corruption. Since the adoption of this document, multiple activities have been undertaken in its various spheres of influence. I would like to now outline some examples of these. Firstly, we have the enactment of the law on asset declaration for certain categories of political figures, public officials and public servants in order to prevent illicit enrichment. The establishment of the High Council of the Judiciary to guarantee the independence of the judiciary, the enactment of the law to sanction asset laundering and financing of terrorism, the enactment of the law on the prevention and punishment of corruption. This focuses on a set of acts of corruption which are not yet criminalized in the Haitian Criminal Code. The creation of the electronic single window for the registering of public limited companies in order to reduce procedural delays. The establishment of the Border Management Committee in order to combat smuggling. The adoption of a code of ethics for public officials and servants in order to enhance integrity in the public service. the enactment of the law regarding the formation, operating and financing of political parties in order to improve their modus operandi and to safeguard democracy. The adoption of an ethics charter seeking to promote transparency in public procurement. The establishment of a system of legal case management within the lower court in Port-au-Prince. The processing of numerous corruption cases prepared by the ULCC in various areas of the country. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to recall that my country devotes particular importance to international, regional and sub-regional cooperation. Without this, the fight against corruption would be extremely difficult. In this framework, Haiti participates at all large international meetings. Here we highlight those organized by the Organization of American States, the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States, CELAC, and the Caribbean Common Market, CARICOM. We highlight that Haiti takes an active part in the implementation of international conventions against corruption. In particular, we underscore the 2013 assessment of the implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption as a reviewing state as well as a state under review. Also, we highlight the mechanism for the review of implementation of the UNCAC. In this regard, my country reviewed Brazil jointly with Mexico. Moreover, my country is currently being reviewed by its peers, namely Indonesia and Colombia. At the end of the first review cycle, what we can say is that delays have been noted in the conduct of the process. This situation leaves states in an unacceptable limbo. In addition, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, my wish is for this session to see encouragement on behalf of all state parties and all stakeholders involved. They should respect their commitments in relation to a better achievement in the second review cycle. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't conclude without thanking our technical and financial partners for their contributions. Thanks to these, states can undertake certain activities and take part in international meetings. Lastly, I would like to reassure you that my country, Haiti, reiterates its commitment to tirelessly continue its fight against corruption. This is essential to consolidate democracy and sustainable development. I wish us every success in our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call upon the representative of Liechtenstein, the Deputy Head to the Office of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ritter.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at the outset, please allow me to extend on behalf of the Liechtenstein delegation our sincere condolences to the people and government of the Russian Federation and express our deepest sympathy to the families and friends of the victims of the tragic plane crash that occurred last Saturday. Mr. President, Liechtenstein is pleased to participate in this conference for the third time as a state party to the convention. In the last years, Liechtenstein has continuously intensified its efforts in taking concrete measures to prevent and combat corruption through its membership in the group of states against corruption of the Council of Europe, the GRECO, and with the UNCAC ratification and the active participation in the review mechanism. Liechtenstein is fully committed to these standards and sets a high priority in improving and adapting the respective national procedures accordingly. At the same time, we are engaged in the effective global implementation and monitoring of these standards, and therefore assign a substantive part of our international development assistance efforts to capacity building for the fight against corruption and for asset recovery and asset return. Our long-standing and successful partnerships with UNODC, UNDP, the OECD, and the International Center for Asset Recovery, the ICAR, are proof of that. Mr. President, Liechtenstein has always advocated for the effective implementation and monitoring of international conventions. Hence, from the very beginning, we supported the establishment of the implementation review mechanism. The mechanism has shown good results and encouraging outcomes. Liechtenstein has experienced it as an interesting and enriching peer process, as reviewer and as reviewed state. The mechanism is a great opportunity for all countries involved to not only contribute to improving the national anti-corruption regimes, but to strengthen the global efforts to fight the scourge of corruption and to raise mutual awareness on a cross-regional level. Through its global application, the mechanism has a crucial role in strengthening good governance and the rule of law worldwide. Both are priorities of our foreign policy. As a follow-up to the first review, the Liechtenstein government has submitted to Parliament a bill amending the criminal code and other laws in order to considerably extend the range of corruption offences to be subject to prosecution. The amendments, which have already undergone a first reading by Parliament, are to include not only the criminalization of active bribery of members of Parliament, members of municipal councils, and managing employees and staff members of public enterprises for acts not contrary to duty, but also the active bribery of foreign officials for acts not contrary to duty, i.e. the so-called facilitation payments. In addition, the bill provides for new incrimination of various private sector bribery offences under a new article. It is foreseen to include them in the list of predicate offences of money laundering under the Criminal Code. Further prominent features of the bill are the introduction of evaluation of property benefits for the purposes of confiscation, which is based on the gross benefit, and the extension of forfeiture to proceeds from corruption-related offences committed repeatedly, irrespective of their categorization as felonies or misdemeanors. Furthermore, as a member of the European Economic Area, Liechtenstein is bound to implement all EU legislation relevant for the internal market. In this framework, the competent Liechtenstein authorities are currently preparing the timely implementation of the 4th EU Anti-Money Laundering Directive. Mr. President, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for the Financing of Development recognizes the recovery of stolen assets as an important tool for the mobilization of domestic resources of developing countries. At the same time, it encourages the international community to develop good practices for asset return in order to make sure that the numerous efforts required for successful asset recovery result in a transparent use of returned assets to the benefit of sustainable development. Liechtenstein fully supports the idea of developing guidelines on this issue, as was also recommended by the UNCAC Working Group on Asset Recovery at its last meeting in Vienna. We are looking forward to engage actively and constructively in such a process. As outlined before, we clearly see the merits of the review mechanism on national levels by strengthening the judiciaries and law enforcement agencies and providing them with a strong and efficient legal basis. Moreover, the mechanism raises the awareness for the topic in the public and private sector and leads to the creation of a political attitude that corruption is not tolerated in any of its forms. However, we also clearly see the need for the thorough analysis of the outcomes of the first review cycle and an efficient and sustainable follow-up. Therefore, the IRG should submit conclusions and concrete recommendations regarding the implementation of Chapters 3 and 4 for consideration and approval at the next COSP. Each state party should submit information on progress achieved in connection with the observations contained in its country reports, including technical assistance needed. Without prejudice to this follow-up process, the second cycle should be launched based on the draft revised self-assessment checklist and provided with adequate funding. Liechtenstein stands ready for both, to make the comprehensive outcome of the first cycle a success and to engage in the launching of the second cycle. In conclusion, Mr. President, I wish to congratulate you on your election and extend our thanks to the government of the Russian Federation and the city of St. Petersburg for the remarkable hospitality in which this important event is being organized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Call upon a representative of Zambia, the Deputy Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission, Ms. Lamba.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to, on behalf of the Zambian delegation, to join other excellencies in expressing sincere condolences to the government of the Federation of Russia on the tragic loss of its nationals in the plane crash that occurred earlier this week. Mr. President, I wish to join my colleagues in congratulating you on being elected as president of this important session of the Conference of States Parties, and I am honored to stand before you all to express our gratitude to the government and the people of the Russian Federation for hosting the 6th Conference of States Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and for the excellent organization and warm reception and facilities placed at our disposal since our arrival in this historical city of St. Petersburg. I further thank the Secretariat for the good work done in facilitating the hosting of this conference. Mr. President, Zambia echoes the statement made by the African Group and the Group of 77 and China on the issue of fighting corruption. Zambia has always recognized that corruption is a major impediment to national development. Thus, in line with her vision to build a nation and a people that are zero tolerant to corruption, and in recognizing the importance of joint efforts, Zambia joined the global fight against corruption in December 2007 when she acceded to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Zambia was one of the countries that was selected and accepted to undergo UNCAC review during the first year of the first review cycle. We were reviewed by Zimbabwe and Italy, and we wish to commend the efforts of the two nations in that regard, and also the efforts of the experts from UNODC. Zambia was also one of the reviewing states parties on the review of the plurinational state of Bolivia and of the Bahamas. It is our considered view, Mr. President, that the reviewed states of Bolivia and Bahamas did benefit from our participation. Mr. President, in compliance with the provisions and aspirations of the Convention, and based on the outcome of my country's review report, Zambia has been reviewing existing legislation and enacting new laws in order to effectively fight the scourge of corruption. Zambia has learned over the years that the fight against corruption will only be appreciated by the large majority of our people when the corrupt are prevented from enjoying the fruits of illegally obtained property, and when the said property is returned to the state. Zambia has therefore enacted the Forfeiture of Proceeds of Crime Act, which enables law enforcement agencies, including the Anti-Corruption Commission, to apply for the forfeiture or confiscation of tainted property to prevent people convicted of corrupt practices and other crimes from deriving the benefits thereof. The said act also makes provision for non-conviction-based forfeiture in which the burden of proof is less stringent than that required to convict a felon. This, Mr. President, emphasizes the importance that Zambia places on asset recovery as a fundamental principle of this convention. It is expected that this conference will ignite all state parties' political will to effect the provisions of Chapter 5 of the Convention in its entirety. We anticipate a concerted effort to simplify cumbersome procedures which are a barrier to the tracing and return of property that belongs to requesting parties through more effective mutual legal assistance. Zambia therefore supports the draft resolution proposed by the Republic of Nigeria in this regard. Mr. President, the enactment of the Public Interest Disclosure Whistleblowers Protection Act in Zambia has affirmed the Zambian government's desire to protect persons that may have relevant information from unlawful reprisals once they disclose it to law enforcement agencies. The reintroduction of the abuse of authority of office clause in the Anti-Corruption Act has made it possible for law enforcement agencies to effectively investigate and prosecute even senior government officials without hindrance. Mr. President, in recognizing the importance of prevention in the fight against corruption, the Zambian government developed a national anti-corruption policy which, among other interventions, aims at institutionalizing corruption prevention measures in both public and private institutions. This encourages participation of a multitude of stakeholders, including civil society organizations in the fight against corruption. A number of these interventions have started bearing fruit, leading to the development of various integrity programs and improved service delivery. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, despite these successes, Zambia is still of the view that a lot still needs to be done and recognizes the importance that this forum presents in sharing ideas on how to do even more to fight the scourge of corruption. Zambia therefore takes keen interest in the implementation of the convention and stands ready to support the mechanism. Mr. President, my delegation shares the view expressed by other states parties on the need to launch the second cycle of the review mechanism at this conference. We believe there is need to build on the experiences and challenges that were learned from the first cycle, and without necessarily changing the focus or the contents of the self-assessment checklist. Zambia urges particularly the Secretariat to consider more opportunities for technical assistance, especially for least developed countries. Mr. President, in conclusion, Zambia pledges its support to the Convention and the mechanism, and I wish to once again thank the Secretariat for inviting us to participate at this conference in this beautiful city of St. Petersburg. I also wish to thank the Federation government, the Russian Federation government, for hosting this important event, and wish the conference God's blessings. I thank you, Mr. President.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. Call upon a representative of the Solomon Islands, the Deputy Secretary to the Prime Minister, Mr. Futayasi.
President, Excellencies, and distinguished guests, it is an honor to speak and update the sixth session of the Conference of the State Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption on the progress Solomon Islands has taken thus far in terms of the implementation of UNCAC. Mr. President, I want to begin Solomon Islands' statement by thanking the government of the Russian Federation for hosting this sixth session of the Conference of the State Parties to UNCAC. I would also like to thank the hardworking UNODC Secretariat for the high-quality documentation in preparation for this conference. At the outset, on behalf of the Solomon Islands government and its people, let me join the previous speakers in sharing our sincere condolence with the families of those who lost their lives on the tragedy that happened on the 31st of October, 2015. May their souls rest in eternal peace. I would also like to join other speakers in farewelling the outgoing president and congratulating and welcoming the new president of the Conference of State Parties to UNCAC. Mr. President, I would like to confirm that Solomon Islands has benefited immensely from the first cycle of the review of Chapters 3 and 4 of UNCAC. Following the recommendations from that review, Solomon Islands is now firmly in the progress of contextualizing and implementing those recommendations. This review process has indeed precipitated the development of my government's anti-corruption program into the future. For this, I would like to sincerely thank our reviewer countries, Slovak and Iraq. Mr. President, the acceleration of my government's action on anti-corruption initiative since the beginning of this year can be attributed largely to the unwavering commitment and support of our Prime Minister, Honorable Manasseh Sogavare. My Prime Minister will now be tabling for enactment by Parliament our anti-corruption bill in the next few weeks. a bill our anti-corruption team in the Office of the Prime Minister and Cabinet has been working on during the last few months. Mr. President, it is fitting at this juncture that I also acknowledge with gratitude the support provided by the UNODC through the UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project, the Australian government, which is financial assisting, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, and the Anti-Corruption Commission of Timor-Leste. We have learned a lot from our study visits to both countries. Mr. President, I can confidently confirm that it is our opinion that a good portion of recommendations provided in our review report will be adequately addressed when our Anti-Corruption Bill 2015 is passed by our Parliament later this month. The objective of the bill is to give legislative effect to the UNCAC by prohibiting corruption in the public and private sectors, providing for the investigation and punishment of corruption offenses, establishing the Solomon Islands Independent Commission Against Corruption relating to its powers and function and other legal and institutional mechanisms, and making related provisions. Mr. President, it has always been our intention that our new anti-corruption bill or law will provide a comprehensive legislation that will make the fight against corruption effective. The development of the anti-corruption bill has been progressed simultaneously with that of the new Ombudsman Bill and the new Leadership Code Bill. The former deals strictly with maladministration complaints, while the latter is responsible entirely with misconduct complaints. I should also mention that we have simultaneously, to date, developed our Integrity Whistleblower Bill, and it is now ready to be put to Parliament as well, same time as the Anti-Corruption Bill for Parliament's enactment. The objective of the Integrity Whistleblowers Bill is to protect and provide immunity for a person from victimization when that same person makes a complaint and or give evidence about suspected corruption, maladministration, or misconduct in office. Mr. President, in Solomon Islands, there is a substantial mismatch between the low level of successful prosecution of corruption charges and a very strong perception by the people that the level of corruption in Solomon Islands is very high. Because people may naturally be afraid of coming forward to complain or as a witness to a corruption case, it was absolutely justifiable for such a bill to be developed, providing therewith protection and immunity to people who made complaint in good faith or as a witness in a corruption case from victimization. Mr. President, I would like to reiterate that Solomon Islands will continue to work together with the rest of the state parties to UNCAC fair fight against corruption. In that regard, Solomon Islands is looking forward for the next cycle of review. To conclude, let me end with the words of late Lee Kuan Yew in his book From Third World to First World. And I quote, "It is easy to start with high moral standard, strong conviction, and determination to beat down corruption. But it is difficult to live up to this good intention unless the leaders are strong and determined enough to deal with all transgressors and without exception." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. I now call upon a representative of Japan, the Attorney for Foreign Policy Bureau from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Uraoka.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to begin by congratulating you on your election as President of the 6th Conference of the State Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And we would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation to the government of the Russian Federation for having this wonderful convention in such a beautiful city in St. Petersburg, and also show our appreciation to all the members of the Secretariat for their work that has been done in preparation for this convention. And we all are aware of the magnitude of the problem of corruption. Corruption undermines the rule of law, which impedes investment and economic growth by disrupting fair competition and thereby impairing the pursuit of sustainable development. The fight against corruption is now a priority of the global agenda. The urgency of addressing corruption is reflected in Goal 16 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and also in many international fora, such as G20 and OECD. Japan is committed to being a part of the collective and united efforts to this end. And Mr. President, we all know the UNCAC was drawn up at the first and only universal convention to comprehensively address the scourge of corruption. Japan is confident that most provisions of the convention are already implemented in our domestic laws, and we will continue to make every effort to conclude the convention as early as possible. With the 10th anniversary of the convention's entry into force next month, and the first review cycle almost completed, we are now at the critical juncture to renew our commitment to fight corruption. Japan supports a smooth transition of the review mechanism to this second cycle, which will be less burdensome to experts involved in the review process, as well as the Secretariat, while being cost-effective. To this end, we should explore various ways to streamline the review process by fully reflecting lessons learned from the first cycle, which stretched out over the initially projected 5 years. That includes an extension in the overall time frame of the second cycle beyond the current plan of 5 years. Japan hopes to contribute constructively to the discussion of the review mechanism of the second cycle at this session of the COSP. Japan is aware of the financial difficulties we may face in the second cycle. We appreciate the Secretariat's continued efforts to provide sufficient information on budgetary matters. However, in order for the review mechanism to be financially sustainable for a long period of time beyond the next cycle, it should be implemented within the current regular budget. We are willing to explore technical and operative solutions to reduce the expenditures for the second cycle. And Mr. President, Japan recognizes that the return of the proceeds of corruption to the countries of origins is a key component to tackle corruption. Returned assets can contribute to sustainable development. In particular, we have supported the process of the Arab Forum on Asset Recovery, a framework established in 2012 under the Deauville Partnership. Japan developed our country guide and roadmap on asset recovery and supported the capacity building program in Tunisia in 2014 in close coordination with UNODC and the STAR initiative. We are committed to maintaining the momentum of asset recovery, especially for Arab countries. In order to facilitate effective asset recovery, it is also important to identify beneficial owners who misuse corporate vehicles to hide corrupt money. Japan promulgated the cabinet order and ministerial ordinance to require financial institutions to verify the natural person behind the vehicle as the beneficial owner. We are also working on amending ministerial ordinances concerning commercial registration. The amendment will ensure that the component authority can access information on beneficial ownership. And Mr. President, No single state can fight corruption on its own. It is therefore crucial to bolster international cooperation and enhance our collective capacity in the implementation of the Convention. In order to assist in filling some of the gaps, Japan has actively provided capacity-building programs through UNAFE and JICA, and for your information, UNAFE stands for United Nations Asia and Far East Institute for the Prevention of Crime and the Treatment of Offenders. To name a few, UNAFE has been conducting the Good Governance Seminar for Southeast Asian countries since 2007, and international training courses on criminal justice, response to corruption since 1998. And as a closing statement, Mr. President, Japan will host the 14th Crime Congress in 2020. That's the year that marks the 50th anniversary since Japan hosted the Congress in 1970 in the city of Kyoto. As the host country of the next Congress, Japan will continue to play an active role in crime prevention and criminal justice, including fight against corruption. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I call the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the Russian Federation, Mr. Haddad.
السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة الحضور، أسعد الله أوقاتكم بكل خير، واسمحوا لي بداية أن أقدم.
President, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first and foremost, in my personal capacity and on behalf of the delegation and my country, Syria, our sincere condolences to the families and friends of the victims of the tragic air crash. We'd also like to thank the government of the Russian Federation and the authorities of the city of St. Petersburg, a historic and beautiful city, for having hosted this 6th Conference of States Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. I would recall to you that today we are celebrating the Day of National Unity of the Russian Federation, and with great joy we are celebrating this day together with all Russians. President, ladies and gentlemen, this conference should enjoy the support of all peoples of the planet, given the role it plays to combat transboundary corruption and the role it plays in ensuring stability and security internationally. President, ladies and gentlemen, we took part in lengthy negotiations in the Austrian capital, Vienna. We participated honestly with a serious attitude, together with other experts, to help to draft this international instrument to combat corruption. These efforts were crowned with success with the adoption of this United Nations Convention Against Corruption. The conference opening the convention for signature took place in Merida in Mexico in 2003, and Syria was one of the first countries to sign this convention. Legal experts consider that adopting this convention is a major stride forward to strengthening justice, equity and responsibility in our country, and to bolster international cooperation and coordination to combat crimes and corruption, in particular economic crimes which undermine sustainable development. The rule of law is a priority for us, but a decade after the entry into force of this convention, we see that crimes and corruption still persist, and we see that they are undermining the economies of all countries and jeopardize the stability of our countries. Corruption was here before the Merida conference, and it remains today. It is embedded in all of our countries in its electronic digital era, and we see that ICT is now encouraging corruption because we have become a global village, and corruption in all of its multifarious forms is rife in all of our countries. President, we must adopt clear mechanisms to combat corruption, in particular in the context of the confiscation and seizure of assets and the recovery of assets, their restitution to all countries affected, with no artificial obstacles and barriers to this. We need to establish a legal mechanism which will allow for tracing and prosecuting criminals and all of those who have benefited from the proceeds of their crimes of corruption. We need to establish international cooperation to face up to this international scourge. We need to finance the international cooperation mechanism to ensure capacity building for all countries so they can face up to this evil and combat corruption in all its forms. In particular, we should all note that corruption is closely interlinked with terrorism. There are highly structured institutions and organizations for corruption and terrorism, so we need to pool our efforts to undermine terrorism and corruption, to make sure that we cut off all sources and financing for terrorism. In combating corruption, if we are successful, we will be able to benefit from this in all of our countries to fight domestic corruption, which we see in all countries to different degrees. Thank you very much for your attention.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. I now call upon the representative of Tonga, Lord of the Realm, Lord Fuzitua.
Mr. President, distinguished guests, and my friends and colleagues from the Pacific. I know it's been a long and hectic schedule over the past few days for everyone, so I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. Mr. President, I would like to begin by echoing the condolences offered by many here for the recent tragedy that has befallen the people of Russia and St. Petersburg in particular, and to offer the prayers of His Majesty the King Tupono of Tonga and the people of the Kingdom of Tonga to the bereaved families. We hope the good Lord will offer them His comfort and His guidance at this time of great loss and suffering. I would also like to congratulate you, Mr. President, for your recent election to the post and to wish you and your officials all success for the upcoming term. I'd like also to thank the Russian Federation, and in particular the city of St. Petersburg, for the warm hospitality that you have shown us during our stay here. I would also like to specifically thank you, Mr. President, and the Conference of State Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption for giving Tonga the opportunity to address this most auspicious gathering and to participate in this conference. I wish to particularly acknowledge the assistance of UNODC, UNDP, and the United Nations Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption Project, or UNPRAC, and the Global Organisation of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, GOPAC, for their initiatives in the Pacific, which have resulted in Tonga being present and participating in this conference. Although the fight against corruption has been ongoing in Tonga for many years, at a legislative, policy and practical level, it has been the recent cooperation with these donor partners in the Pacific that has seen the recent resurgence and political will to further these efforts, and in particular with reference to UNCAC. One example of this is the anti-corruption workshop that was held with the assistance of UNODC, UNDP, UNPRAC and GOPAC in Tonga in May of this year. This was attended by all members of the Legislative Assembly of Tonga, including the Lord Speaker and the Prime Minister and Cabinet. The workshop gave invaluable insights into the benefits of UNCAC and what is involved in the process. A tangible outcome of this workshop was the establishment of a GOPAC Tonga chapter and the subsequent establishment by unanimous resolution of our Legislative Assembly of the first Parliamentary Standing Committee on Anti-Corruption in the Pacific, both of which I'm honoured to have been elected to and appointed as chairman. Tonga, as I have mentioned, has had measures in place to battle corruption for some years. In 2002, we enacted the Commissioner for Public Relations Act. This commissioner has been responsible, pursuant to a cabinet decision, to deal with both administrative and judicial review matters, as well as allegations of direct criminal corruption. This office has been in existence for some years and is quite active in its duties. In 2007, Tonga also enacted the Anti-Corruption Commissioner Act, which provides for the establishment of an Anti-Corruption Commission and an Anti-Corruption Commissioner to receive and investigate allegations of direct corruption. This legislation establishes what we feel is a nation-appropriate model for Tonga, whereby the Anti-Corruption Commissioner works in tandem with the Legislative Assembly, and in particular with the Standing Committee on Anti-Corruption, to receive and review corruption allegations, with the Commission providing the investigative and judicially aligned duties, and the Standing Committee providing review and oversight, with prosecution of corruption cases then referred to the Office of our Attorney General based upon these investigations and review. Pursuant to our Anti-Corruption Commissioner Act, the Commissioner must be appointed by His Majesty the King upon recommendation by our Privy Council. I am pleased to say that with the momentum of the establishment of the Parliamentary Standing Committee, in no small part due to the assistance and support from UNODC, UNDP, UNCAC and GOPAC, and with the impetus and political will and encouragement from the Legislative Assembly, the Cabinet have now sought from Privy Council that a Commissioner shall now finally be appointed. And I'm glad to say that by the beginning of the new year, Privy Council will have finalised the recommendation to His Majesty for appointment of our first Anti-Corruption Commissioner. At a legislative level, Tonga's enacted the Money Laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act, the Computer Crimes Act, and is making amendments to its Financial Institutions Act and Criminal Offences Act to more strategically and specifically address corruption activities. Tonga has also been active at various regional and international workshops. These include workshops held by UNODC and UNCAC to assist with capacity building, cooperation with the Pacific Island Forum to establish a new code of conduct for members of Parliament, and the recent UNODC and UNDP-assisted high-level SIDS anti-corruption meeting in Mauritius, which resulted in the Mauritius communique. Tonga is present at this gathering as an observer, as we're yet to accede to UNCAC. One observation I've been able to make at this conference, and in my dealing with UNODC in particular, is the respect which has been shown to the sovereignty of nations on the question of ratification. And this is something for which we are grateful and which I would encourage further. As best as I'm able to glean, the advice, guidance and assisted proffered by UNODC and by the institutions present towards institutional and capacity building has been in good faith, cognizant of the fact that the ultimate question of ratification is a sovereign national one. I'm also pleased to have observed that this has included a sensitivity to the particular needs of small island developing states, or SIDS, and of the particular needs of my region of the Pacific. This is also something I would further encourage. If I may paraphrase from parts of the recent Mauritius communique, which deals particularly with the needs of SIDS, including those specific to my region of the Pacific and to my country of the Kingdom of Tonga. It states, recognising that SIDS are characterised by their smallness and challenges with existing human capacity, resources and accessibility, and therefore they require context-specific anti-corruption reforms that are affordable, sustainable, accountable and effective to prevent and combat corruption, and that sensibly, subsequent to these considerations, the communique therefore goes on to request that those SIDS who have yet to ratify or incorporate UNCAC into the domestic regime do so in line with the principle of respect of national sovereignty. With these particularities in mind, Tonga looks forward to further cooperation with the UNODC, UNDP and its other donor partners to further its commitment to both institutional and capacity building to prevent and fight corruption at both the national, regional and international level and throughout the SIDS community, and to do so upon a basis of the respect for national sovereignty, as we all work towards engendering and incorporating the admirable, lofty but extremely attainable principles set out in UNCAC at all these levels. Mr. Chairman, again, I thank you for your time and I thank the plenary.
Thank you very much for that information. Distinguished colleagues, that concludes the list of speakers from national delegations. I'd like to thank all of those who've taken the floor for having presented the national practice in the anti-corruption fight and international cooperation under the auspices of the United Nations in the sphere of anti-corruption activities. To conclude our general discussion, we still have 4 speakers on our list, representatives of organizations. I would like to ask the speakers to please keep to the speaking time. The first speaker from international organizations is the Director for Governance and Peace Building Cluster from the UNDP, Mr. Krulis.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, allow me to convey, first of all, on behalf of Helen Clark and all UNDP staff, my sincere condolences to the nation, and in particular to all the families affected by the tragic airplane crash in Egypt. Allow me also, Mr. President, to congratulate you on your election to the presidency of the 6th session of the Conference of State Parties. This session of the Conference of State Parties comes at a particular time, and this for 2 main reasons. First, the session is happening shortly after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which sets out the blueprint for development for the next 15 years. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted by world leaders on 25 September 2015 are the result of a comprehensive and unprecedented global dialogue on the world's future that involved numerous stakeholders from governments, civil society, academia and the private sector. Goal 16 in particular breaks new ground in committing member states to promote peaceful and inclusive societies, provide access to justice for all, and build effective and inclusive institutions at all levels. The goal contains some important targets on anti-corruption that UNDP and UNODC have been working on together over the past years. The inclusion of Goal 16 is important for many reasons, but not least because for the first time, the development agenda makes an explicit link between sustainable development and promoting peace and security, rule of law, and transparent and accountable governance. There is now empirical evidence that once a critical threshold reached, increasing levels of corruption result in increased levels of violence, impunity, and insecurity. Goal 16 and its targets on corruption is thus not only a valuable and important aspiration in its own right, it is also an important enabling goal for the entire Sustainable Development Agenda. The second reason why this 6th session is special is because we are also celebrating the 10th anniversary of the enforcement of the United Nations Convention on Anti-Corruption as a global framework for combating corruption. At this conference, state parties will launch the 2nd phase of the UNCAC review mechanism, focusing on the preventive measures which are at the heart of UNDP's corruption work around the world. Since the first session of the Conference of State Parties held in Amman in 2006, much progress has been achieved in terms of UNCAC implementation. Progress so far would not have been possible without the important work of the Secretariat, and I hereby pay tribute to the UNODC, with whom UNDP works very closely to respond to the increasing needs for technical assistance and capacity development. Building on more than 2 decades of experience in providing technical support for strengthening governance mechanisms, systems, and institutions around the world, UNDP acknowledges the role of UNCAC as the core framework for anti-corruption programming and an important entry point for our work with governments and other stakeholders at the global, regional, and country levels. To illustrate, UNDP has been providing anti-corruption support to more than 100 countries around the world, mainly through our governance and peace-building programs. In Asia, through the Australia-funded joint UNDP-UNODC support project, we provided assistance to over 10 countries in the Pacific. In addition, we supported sectoral anti-corruption work in China, Indonesia, Pakistan, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, and we have a development solutions partnership on anti-corruption with the Republic of Korea. In the Arab states and with US funding, we have been providing support to the Arab Anti-Corruption and Integrity Network, and at country level, we support institutions in Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia. In Eastern Europe, we have been working with Ukraine, Moldova, Armenia, Serbia, and other countries to enhance data and budget openness. In Latin America, UNDP has been working in Brazil, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Haiti to strengthen anti-corruption measures with respect to service delivery in sectors such as health, education, and water. Similar sectoral corruption risk assessments are taking place in Africa, in particular in Benin, Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea, Liberia, Mauritania, Nigeria, and Uganda, and support to strengthen the role of anti-corruption agencies has also been provided to Mauritius, Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, and Kenya. From a development perspective, it is important to make sure that the UNCAC, as a global commitment to fight corruption, becomes also one of the key policy and monitoring frameworks for the explicit and implicit integrity targets of the SDG agenda. Vice versa, we hope that the new development agenda will provide an impetus to speed up and strengthen implementation of the UNCAC provisions at the national level. The SDGs and Goal 16 in particular thus provide another opportunity to strengthen the UNDP and UNODC partnership to complement each other's efforts while ensuring coherence in technical assistance in support to the new development agenda. As a development agency, UNDP's focus is on addressing corruption risks within specific sectors like health, education, water and sanitation, and soon also the justice and security sectors. These assessments provide good entry points to implement within the organizational culture and reality of each specific sector a number of UNCAC prevention measures contained in Chapter 2, such as the conflict of interest, human resource management, access to information, ethics and code of conduct, absenteeism and complaints handling. Mr. President, I would like to conclude my remarks with three key messages. First, the review mechanism needs to be effectively followed by the development and implementation of the national work plans and strategies to address the needs identified in the review process. The implementation of the national anti-corruption plans should be in tune with the national development plans that are being aligned with the global SDG agenda. Second, to realize the full potential of UNCAC and in the collaborative spirit of the SDG agenda, we need to continue and reinforce our efforts to engage multiple stakeholders, including the private sector and non-governmental actors, in the fight against corruption. And finally, the action agenda agreed at the Financing for Development Conference earlier this year in Addis Ababa puts more emphasis on building capacities for domestic resource mobilization. Improved mobilization of domestic resources will not be possible without curbing the various forms of corruption and money laundering that severely reduce the taxable resource base. Support for strengthening national integrity institutions therefore will need to be increased, not reduced. But it also means that impunity for crimes of corruption can no longer be tolerated. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And I call the representative of the Anti-Corruption and Financial Crimes Academy, the IACA, Mr. Schmidt.
Mr. President, at the beginning I would like to reiterate our sincere condolences to victims' families of the recent airplane crash, which have already been expressed by the head of our organization before. Also, I would like to express once more our thanks and appreciation for the excellent organization of the conference and the warm welcome in St. Petersburg by our hosts. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our Dean and Executive Secretary, Mr. Martin Kreutner, I'm honored to address this 6th session of the Conference of the States Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and share the International Anti-Corruption Academy's perspective on this important event. A little over a month ago, we witnessed a turning point in history as more than 150 world leaders, along with 1,800 delegates, adopted the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, a transformative vision with a blueprint for a better future. The Universal Agenda Sustainable Development Goals and associated targets came not only at the 70th anniversary of the United Nations and the 10th anniversary of the UNCAC getting effective, but also as a result of the most inclusive process since this global organization opened its doors. IACA is honored and happy to have had the opportunity to contribute to the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. The unprecedented agenda recognizes anti-corruption as bedrock of progress, with targets to substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all its forms, promote the rule of law at the national and international levels, and ensure equal access to justice for all, as well as develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels under Goal 16. It shines a light on corruption's role in inciting and perpetuating violence, insecurity, and inequality, beacons of a downward spiral for societies. At the same time, it acknowledges anti-corruption as a common denominator for achieving the SDGs and keeping our promise to transform the world into a better place over the next 15 years. However, let us be frank. All the universal goals run the risk of being severely undermined by corruption. So the question is, how can we make sure that that doesn't happen? There is global consensus that there are no quick fixes to eradicate corruption. But the UNCAC goes a long way in providing the strongest possible framework for addressing this global scourge. The UNCAC, with its review mechanism, is a key ingredient for the fulfillment of the SDGs. The Convention has reached nearly universal ratification, but lacks universal implementation. And although we have made a robust leap forward, a long road still lies ahead of all of us. We need to work harder, and we need to work together in order to fully implement it. In this context, and in a time of economic uncertainty, the Let Crime Pay principle, enshrined in Article 62, Para 2C of the UNCAC, and endorsed by an IACA resolution of its second session of the Assembly of Parties in Bangkok, Thailand, can serve as a means to an end. Excellencies, we live in a rapidly changing world where knowledge, skills, and values are a major driver of development. Education can help create the conditions for securing a sustainable future for all societies, for all peoples of this world. Or, as Malala Yousafzai, the 2014 Nobel Peace Laureate from Pakistan, said at the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit in September, education is hope, education is peace. Anti-corruption education can strengthen individuals in their ethical decision-making and contribute to the understanding and civically monitoring the activities of those entrusted with upholding the rule of law. Empowered societies spark change on a larger scale through collective action. They contribute to a non-tolerance of corruption and pave the way for strengthening human rights, equity and equality, prosperity and development. Transformation in values and actions can only occur if societies are equipped and empowered to drive it. In the words of United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, empowerment is the most effective development tool. And that is exactly where anti-corruption education and training enter the equation. These activities must aim to promote a deeper understanding of the intricacies of corruption, engage all sectors of society, including the corporate business world, build knowledge, and provide hands-on skills to prevent and combat it in practice. They must seek to reshape behaviors, raise awareness, and promote ethics so as to stimulate legitimate individual and collective efforts and actions. This is what IACA, the International Organization and Post-Secondary Educational Institution, is all about. Advancing the goals of the UNCAC is at the very heart of our work. We empower professionals and provide technical assistance to states and other stakeholders seeking to strengthen their anti-corruption and compliance regimes. In fact, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the guardian of the Convention, was one of the driving forces behind IACA's establishment more than 4 years ago. The growing number of parties and other stakeholders that stand behind IACA speaks for itself of the global significance of its work. With a constituency of 64 parties, IACA brings together 2/3 of the world population. We work with our parties and partners to strengthen international cooperation, to break down dogmatic barriers, and ultimately to ensure a more coordinated prevention of and fight against corruption. IACA's education and training portfolio has steadily evolved over the years. We have remained at the spearhead of anti-corruption through the development of new and reinforcement of existing programs. We have strengthened dialogue between the public and private sectors, and we have empowered professionals from around 140 countries, professionals who pass these lessons on and act as multipliers worldwide. IACA brings together professionals from around the world, introducing them to a variety of subject areas, offering a combination of theoretical and practical tools, and guiding them in finding durable solutions which fit their specific scenarios. This is what we call our holistic approach. We connect government officials with business leaders, media with academia, and act as catalysts for the formation of alliances and benchmarks in the field. In our master and anti-corruption studies, we equip working professionals with the knowledge and the necessary tools to change misconceptions.
So I need to remind you about your time in a speech, please.
To address sector-specific vulnerabilities and to build sound anti-corruption strategies. This renowned program saw its first class graduate in 2014 and welcomed its third intake this year. Next year, we will introduce another master program centered on compliance, private sector anti-corruption, and collective action. Our annual Summer Academy celebrated its 5th year this July, and will also see offsprings in Latin America this year and a similar program in East Africa next year, 2016. In addition to tailor-made programs, we assist two states and other stakeholders in improving their risk areas. And among others, we have also paired up with UNODC to reinforce civil society's capacities with regard to the review mechanism and to promote public-private partnerships. These efforts did not go unnoticed. Just this summer, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations General Assembly, through Resolution 29/11, noted with appreciation the capacity-building activities and specialized curricula developed by relevant institutions, such as the UNODC and the UNCAC, in recognizing the negative impact of corruption on human rights and sustainable development and the significance of anti-corruption education. Ladies and gentlemen, IACA stands ready to support you all in the endeavor, and we encourage you to take advantage of our activities. On a concluding note, I would like to draw your attention to the 4th session of IACA's Assembly of Parties, taking place in Vienna, Austria from 9 to 11 December, and invite all states, both parties and observers, to partake in this important gathering. Mr. President, investing in anti-corruption education and empowerment is the smart way towards sustainable development, safeguarding human rights and strengthening the rule of law. IACA therefore pledges its full support to this conference, but also to the next cycle of the review mechanism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much indeed. I now call upon the representative of the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, Mr. Hyde.
On behalf of the Global Organisation of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, I also offer my condolences to the people of St. Petersburg on the recent tragedy. GOPAC officially declared its support for the United Nations Convention Against Corruption at the signing ceremony in Mérida, Mexico in 2003. Subsequently, in 2006, the GOPAC Global Conference in Arusha, Tanzania, issued a resolution outlining a commitment to create our global task force of the UNCAC, with the aim of enhancing the capacity of parliamentarians to localise the convention by adapting international standards to national needs, and to play an important oversight role in the monitoring and review of the national effort to implement UNCAC. A forum of parliamentarians has been hosted in conjunction with every conference of state parties to the UNCAC since. This forum of parliamentarians is one of GOPAC's flagship events. This year's forum contains 2 panel sessions. We're pleased to receive collaboration from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and the UN Development Programme through their Australian Aid, DFAT, funded UN Pacific Regional Anti-Corruption UNPRAC project. In our first session, which is entitled Partnerships to Curtail Corruption in the Pacific, and from our civil society partner, Transparency International, in our second session entitled Prosecuting Grand Corruption, Let Us Bring Them to Justice. GOPAC, UNODC, UNDP and TI are pleased to welcome a keynote address by Mr. Yuri Fedotov, UNODC Executive Director, to open the forum tomorrow at 10 a.m. GOPAC was founded in October 2002 as a result of a global conference in Ottawa, Canada, and this brought together over 170 parliamentarians and 400 observers dedicating to fighting corruption. GOPAC is unique in that it is the only international network of parliamentarians dedicated to preventing and fighting corruption. Its members represent more than 60 countries in all regions of the world. A number of GOPAC's chapter chairs are heads and members of delegations here and observers, including our GOPAC APNAC chair in Africa, Honourable Shakil Ahmed from Kenya, GOPAC Tonga's Lord Fusatua, GOPAC Cook Islands chair, Minister Nandi Glassi, GOPAC ARPAC chair for Palestine, Dr. Azmi Shuaibi, Congressista Carlos Bruce from Peru, Dr. Carlos Perez Cuevas from Mexico, Dr. Miguel Moreto from Ecuador, Dr. Honourable Namik Dokol from Albania, plus MPs from Nigeria, Congo, Argentina, Algeria, Kenya, Mali, Tunisia joining us here. In 2013, GOPAC members unanimously mandated the organisation to establish grand corruption as a crime of international law, to enable international institutions and alliances to prosecute the guilty. And this was reinforced 3 weeks ago at our World Conference in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, where the Honourable Fadli Zon, Deputy Speaker of the Indonesia Parliament, was elected as our new chair. GOPAC's General Assembly also prioritised our responsibilities as directly elected representatives of the peoples of the world to combat corruption in all its forms and actively work towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal 16 of peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, access to justice for all, and effective, accountable institutions at all levels. None of the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly SDG 16, will be achieved by 2030 without active involvement of parliamentarians. And GOPAC is pleased to join with UNCAC in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues, we have now concluded our general discussion. I'd like to thank once again all participants. After the lunch break, we shall carry on with items 5 and 6 of the agenda on the recovery of assets and international cooperation. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Secretariat before the lunch break.
Many thanks, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a couple of announcements. The EU coordination meeting will be held in conference room E at 13 o'clock. The informal consultations on document L3 from Israel will be held in conference room F at 14 o'clock. The briefing and interested delegations on CRP6 Rev 1 will be held in conference room E at 14 o'clock. The informal consultations on L10 Switzerland will be held in conference room F at 15 o'clock, and informal consultations on L7 United States will be held in conference room D at 17 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The meeting shall meet again at 15:15.